Chapter 380. Don't just stand there. Say something, I urged. Nethan set down his knife and fork, lifted a teacup to his lips, and fixed Dasichi with a cool stare. She'd been silent until now, her body trembling with restrained anger. Summoning every shred of courage, Dasichi forced her racing heart to still, gripped her sword's hilt, and declared, "That matter has nothing to do with me. You're ghost hand Nethan. Even if you're the strongest man alive, I'll still arrest you." With a cry, she lunged, swinging her blade in a fierce arc, eyes squeezed shut. The steel whistled through the air, but met only empty space. Dasichi froze. Blinking, she opened her eyes to find Nethan casually chewing a piece of carrot, utterly unperturbed. How could she have swung through thin air? Even if she'd missed him, the table should have borne the cut. Yet her sword hadn't nicked wood, glass, or porcelain. Nothing. She stared at the blade in her hand, heart pounding. Arrest me? Nethan took another sip of tea, then placed his cup on the table. Arresting me, he said slowly, is a far taller order than becoming the world's greatest swordsman. When Dasichi heard Nethan's words, his eyes went slack for a heartbeat, then flared with renewed fury. He hefted his sword and lashed out again. The blade whipped through the air, slicing cleanly through the space where Nethan sat, and even cutting a groove in the old wooden table. But where Nethan truly was, the sword passed harmlessly through him, as though he were no more than a trick of the light. Dasichi's jaw dropped. He swung again and again, each time the blade puncturing empty air, unable to nick flesh or wood. He panted, not from exhaustion but from disbelief. "Why are you so desperate to arrest me?" Nethan asked, his voice calm and almost amused. He remained perfectly still, unflinching. Dasichi stifled a roar of frustration. "I'm with the Navy," he gasped. "It's my duty to hunt down every last pirate." Nethan leaned back, eyes narrowing. "Then tell me this, what really distinguishes the Navy from a band of pirates? Is it simply the flag you sail under? Those who burn, kill, and plunder without a banner? Are they any less pirates than the ones you chase?" Silence stretched between them, broken only by the distant creak of ship timbers and Dasichi's ragged breathing, as the question hung in the air. Sergeant Dashiki had never questioned her role in the Navy. As a low-ranking petty officer, she believed that matters of strategy and morality were for admirals to debate. Her only duty was to obey orders. Yet Nethan's words unsettled her simple convictions. Confusion churned in her mind until she managed, "Of course the flag isn't the real issue." Nethan nodded, chewing the last piece of meat, then wiped his mouth on a cloth. "Exactly. You raise the Navy's standard, declare you're safeguarding the people of Tianlong, and then scour the world for that so-called heavenly gold. Anyone who won't pay, you punish them. Tell me, what is that, if not outright piracy?" Dasichi fell silent. His question struck her like a blade, shredding the last of her fragile sense of justice. The flag didn't matter. The real business was burning, killing, and looting in its name. In protecting Tianlong's interests and seizing gold by force, the Navy had become indistinguishable from pirates. Nethan watched in stunned silence as Dasichi's sword slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor. Until this very moment, she'd sworn she'd rather die than surrender. Never yield, never retreat, even in the face of death. But now, confronted with the truth that her defiance was utterly pointless, her fighting spirit dissolved like ice under the sun. She stumbled, slumped to her knees, then collapsed face first into the dirt. Her vision swimmed, and a jumble of distant voices echoed in her mind. Putting the handkerchief aside, Nethan rose to his full height and gave Dasichi a single unreadable glance. Then, boom, the wall on his left shattered in a spray of brick and stone. Through the explosion of debris, Aptine Smoker was flung head over heels into the old shop, smashing spine first into the wall behind him. Even for a Navy officer of Captain Smoker's renown, his raw power far exceeding what his rank suggested, this blow was brutal. Yet he still fell short of the legendary strength wielded by the Marine vice-admirals, and they, in turn, might struggle against the current Robin, one of the four Emperor's most fearsome lieutenants. Dasichi's name caught in Nethan's throat, fallen, beaten, her will broken. This was no longer a battle of swords and hockey, but a simple reckoning of who refused to quit. A thin trickle of blood ran from the corner of Smoker's mouth as he crashed against the wall. He braced himself, then turned to see Dasichi slumped on the floor. Dasiki, he yelled, rushing forward. But she didn't answer. She simply sat there, eyes blank, as if she'd lost all sense of her surroundings. Only then did Smoker register the newcomer standing calmly in the center of the room, his face drained of color. "You, Ghost Hand Nethan," he spat. Nethan said nothing. He just watched him, unflinching. Smoker's gaze flicked back to Dasiki's vacant stare, and he ground his teeth. "What did you do to her, you bastard?" Nethan shrugged, his voice casual. "Nothing much. I wanted to have a little chat with a naval officer. She seemed friendly enough, so we talked." Fury flared in Smoker's eyes, but he forced himself to stay still. He knew better than to pick a fight he couldn't win, especially with Robin at Nethan's side. "Let's go," Nethan said, nodding toward the doorway. At that moment, Robin entered. He didn't even look at Smoker. Instead, he gave Dasiki one long, empty-eyed glance and then turned to Nethan. Nethan offered him a half-smile. "See for yourself," he said quietly. "That's all I was doing." And with that, the two of them walked away, leaving Smoker to stare helplessly after them. Robin shot Nethan a thoughtful look, then followed him out of the shop without another word. From the doorway, Captain Smoker watched the pair slip away. His fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't dare step forward. Outside, the gathered Marines remained motionless, none bold enough to challenge Nethan's passage. Once the last echo of their footsteps faded, Smoker let out a slow breath and turned back inside. There, slumped on the floor, was Dasichi. "Are you all right?" he asked, concern tinting his voice. Dasichi blinked, coming out of her daze. After a moment's pause, she reached for her sword, sheathing it with practiced ease before rising to her feet. "I'm fine, Captain Smoker," she replied, though her tone betrayed a lingering weariness. Smoker allowed himself a small, relieved smile. It seemed Nethan's reputation for ruthless efficiency still unsettled even the most confident among them. Dasiki dropped her gaze, hesitating briefly before speaking again. I'm still a bit shaken. Could I return to rest early today?" "Go right ahead," Smoker said, his eyes on her as he noted the faint tremor in her shoulders. "That young man, Nethan, they call him the Phantom Hand, isn't someone you cross lightly. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Consider yourself lucky you walked away." Dasiki nodded, still lost in thought. With one last distant look, she turned and left the shop, leaving Smoker standing amid the quiet aftermath of their encounter. Smoker watched silently, shaking his head. He could see how hard Dasiki had taken those 3-move and 2-move losses to Nethan, but it didn't bother him. Failure itself wasn't shameful. Only those who rise stronger from defeat prove their true power. After all, Nethan had lost before too, even spending time locked up in Advanced City's prison. Chapter 381, The Power of a Single Shot. Deep beneath the island, an underground river coils through a vast, shadowy cavern. Water drips from the ceiling in a steady rhythm, the echoes mingling with the soft lap of waves against stone. Though it's called a river, this hidden waterway actually leads out to the open sea. In the middle of its dark channel rests a colossal vessel, its timbers blackened by time and draped in thick emerald moss. This is Pluto, the fabled ancient weapon forged by the Empire of old. Robin stepped lightly along the mossy deck beside Hades, her gloved fingers tracing the cannon's curved surface. She wasn't here out of fear or a desire for destruction, but out of scholarly curiosity. Pluto wasn't just a war machine. It was a bridge to a bygone era, one she had spent her life studying. Rumor held that a single blast from this cannon could flatten an entire island, a force so devastating it had become legend. Nethan climbed up to the base of the gun barrel and looked up in awe. His own power had grown tremendously, enough to rival even the great Whitebeard, yet standing before Pluto, he felt the true scale of what mere metal and gunpowder could achieve. If unleashed without restraint, that single, thunderous shot could send mountains crumbling into the sea. And with no one to stand in its way, no island would stand a chance. Nethan stood on the deck of the Pluto, gazing down at the islands slumbering below. He knew full well that leveling an entire landmass with a single strike was no small feat, and he'd never attempted anything of that scale before. This wasn't the sort of trick you practiced on a populated island. The Pluto was as legendary as the Neptune White Star, the ancient weapon said to command the Sea Kings. No one doubted its power. Few could withstand its fire, even if it were aimed square at Marine headquarters. Ready to test her out on the Holy Land when we return? Nethin asked Robin with a teasing grin. Robin didn't turn around. Her eyes stayed fixed on the ancient scrolls spread across the navigation table. That would force the world government's hand, she said softly. Are you truly prepared for that? Nethin's grin faded. He knew she was right. His ambitions stretched far beyond becoming one of the 4 emperors or even the pirate king. After the pirates had fallen, his true goal was to topple the world government itself. I admit, I'm not quite there yet, he confessed. Robin finally looked over her shoulder, her expression thoughtful. Before she could say more, Nethin slipped around behind her. He wrapped his arms around her waist and rested his chin lightly on her shoulder. But I am ready to hit you. His voice was playful, but there was an undertone of earnest determination. Robin wrenched free just enough to flash him a wry smile. You're impossible. She turned back to the scrolls. Ancient records from Hades lay open before her, histories that predated even the celestial weapons they now wielded. Somewhere in those dusty pages was the key to mastering the Pluto's full potential, but steering such a formidable vessel was no easy task. The ship responded to its pilot's will, yes, but its temper could be as unpredictable as the sea itself. Nethin stepped away, hands shoved into his coat pockets. Together, they bent over the maps and manuscripts, plotting their next move in a world that would soon tremble at the mention of their names. Nethin and Robin climbed aboard the Pluto and set to work, examining its controls and inner mechanisms with careful precision. By the time they'd finished, they'd unraveled a good portion of the ship's secrets, but Nethin had no desire to flaunt his new knowledge as a pilot. His real goal was to bring the entire vessel back to the 10,000 Kingdoms safely, using his twisted gravity gift to steer her home. That would require patience and study, not a rash test flight. Gearing up, Nethin called over his shoulder, "Let me know when you've got more questions." Robin nodded, eyes still glued to her datapad. He made his way aft to the Pluto's turn, where the cavern's cold seawater pressed against the hull. Closing his eyes, he focused his power on the currents beyond the ship's outer plating, warping the water itself into a sudden, forceful surge. Crash! The long-dormant Pluto shuddered, her hull creaking as centuries of inertia gave way. Though her engines remained silent, Nethin's manipulation of the ocean currents drove her forward. The hidden river beneath the cave floor began to fill, waves surging higher until the entire chamber swelled with dark, pressurized seawater. With a final twist of his gift, he bent the cavern walls inward, channeling the flood into a powerful underwater jet. They shot through that twisting channel for several hundred meters, the only light coming from bioluminescent algae on the rock walls. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, the tunnel spat them out onto the open seabed, tens of meters below the surface. The Pluto's buoyancy took over, and she rose swiftly through churning waves, free at last from her ancient prison. Above them lay the boundless ocean and the long voyage home. Nethin stood at the heart of Pluto's control chamber, his hand trembling with anticipation. For centuries, the ancient weapon had slumbered, silent, immovable. Now at last, its power would awaken. He inhaled deeply and summoned his mastery of twisted gravity. A shimmering field rippled outward, clinging to every girder and turbine of the colossal warship. At first, Pluto rose with a deliberate slowness, as if testing the strength of Nethin's will. Then, with a thunderous roar, the vessel broke free of its moorings, rocketing upward until it vanished into the clouds. Far to the north, in the fortified halls of Poneglyph Castle, the 5 elders of the world government assembled in the Grand Council chamber. Their normally placid faces were drawn tight with unease. Reports had just arrived. Nethin, known only as the mysterious Phantom Hand, had appeared in Alabasta. Why would he target Alabasta? Elder Wu asked, breaking the heavy silence. The Nefertari clan is the sole surviving lineage of the original 20 families in the Common Seas. If anyone could betray us, it's them. Another elder folded his hands across his robe. They claim loyalty to the crown, yet they live among the ordinary kingdoms, lacking any celestial dragon status or privileges. Could they be in league with this Phantom Hand? Elder Wu's eyes narrowed. If the Nefertaris hold secrets of our founding, and they've struck a deal with Nethin, we cannot afford to wait. I want every intelligence unit on Alabasta immediately. As the elders rose from their seats, the shadow of a new crisis crept across the world government's vast empire, one that would test their authority and plunge Alabasta into turmoil. If anyone in that family were to learn forbidden secrets and collude with the Ghost Hand pirates, the consequences could be catastrophic. In fact, the recent activities of the Ghost Hand pirates have already set Wulaoxing, the world government's old guard council, on edge. If those pirates dared to strike at red-haired Shanks and Beast Kaido, seize the road poneglyph that points the way to Laughtail, and then proclaim their intent to conquer the Grand Line and claim the title of Pirate King, it would trigger alarms across the world. After all, One Piece has never explicitly appeared in over 2 centuries. Merely declaring its existence wouldn't undermine the world government's authority, but it would unleash a flood of challengers seeking the ultimate prize. Strangely enough, that kind of chaos might even serve the world government's interests by distracting and containing rival powers. Yet Nethan, known to the world until now as Ross, harbors no desire to become the next Pirate King. His ambitions lie instead in the steady development of his nations, strengthening internal governance, fostering stable growth, and expanding his territories abroad. Still, Wulaoxing cannot shake the suspicion that Nethan's true goal is more imperial, an ambition to dominate the seas as a sovereign emperor. To make matters more unsettling, reports suggest that Alabasta may hold fresh clues to the location of the ancient weapon Pluto, a discovery that could tip the balance of power in any ruler's favor. One of the 5 elders leaned forward, his expression suddenly grave. At once, the other 4 stiffened. In Alabasta, Nethan had appeared alongside Nico Robin. Robin, the sole survivor of Ohara and the only person in the world who could decipher the original history texts. The very thought sent a chill through the Gorosei. If Nethan and Robin were working together to unearth an ancient weapon, then their plans might already have succeeded. Pirates in possession of ancient weapons posed a nightmare scenario. Each elder pressed a hand to his temple, frowning at the implications. Until now, the Ghost Hand pirates had been the Navy's greatest headache, but if they gained even one of those legendary weapons, their threat would multiply 100-fold. Judging by the current situation, a head-on confrontation with the Ghost Hand pirates was inevitable, and even if the Navy emerged victorious, it would be a bitter, Pyrrhic win soaked in heavy losses. Such weapons must never fall into Nethan's hands. The elder who had spoken before cleared his throat and intoned, "We cannot allow them to obtain an ancient weapon." But no one offered a solution. They all agreed on the danger, yet none knew how to stop it. The ancient weapons could not be allowed to surface, and time was running out. Navy High Command can't dispatch its entire fleet to the New World just to confront the Ghost Hand pirates. "We simply don't have the resources," one of the 5 swords in the room declared, his tone grave. "Our only hope is to secure Pluto's blueprints as quickly as possible. Once CP9 has them, they can move at full speed." He paused, steel blue eyes sweeping the gathered officers. "With those designs, Vegapunk could replicate the ancient weapon Pluto. That's our sole course of action." Around the table, faces hardened into nods or broke into resigned sighs. The plan was risky, but it was the only path left. Chapter 382, Unexpected Developments, on the East Blue Bika Sky Island. More than 3 months had passed since Nethan unearthed the ancient weapon Pluto. After a month of relentless practice, he'd mastered its powers to a level few could match. Meanwhile, his ship, the Rhodes, remained grounded on the island's sandy shore, rather than cutting through the waves. Though the world government knew Sky Island existed, they possessed almost no concrete intelligence about its people or its secrets. Nethan, seated in the palace's war room, held an up-to-date newspaper in his hand. His brow knitted in concentration as he read the explosive headline, "Blackbeard's Ultimate Betrayal. Tiki slays Whitebeard Captain Sage. Defects from crew." Could it really be true? Nethan's pulse quickened at the implications. If Marshal Tiki, better known as Blackbeard, had indeed slain Sage and broken away from the mighty Whitebeard pirates, the balance of power in these seas would shift dramatically. Nearby, Robin leafed through her own copy of the Gazette. She tucked a lock of dark hair behind her ear and laid the paper flat on the table. Thoughtfully, she tapped her chin. "This Tiki fellow, she began, the corner of her mouth lifting in a wry smile. Calls himself Blackbeard. He's daring. Killing one of Whitebeard's top captains and walking away unscathed takes more than luck. His strength must be unbelievable. Nethan glanced up, meeting her gaze. If he's that powerful, he said quietly, we'll need to stay on high alert. Word like this travels fast. Every pirate crew and government fleet will be scrambling to learn the truth. And if Blackbeard really is on the loose, well, who knows what chaos he'll unleash next. Robin nodded, folding the paper with care. Chaos, or opportunity, she added. Either way, we'd best be ready. Outside, the winds over Bika Sky Island whispered of approaching storms, both in the skies above and across the east blue, and somewhere beyond the horizon, Blackbeard Tiki was already plotting his next move. Nathan leaned back in his chair, fingers tracing the edge of the map spread across the table. It isn't just what you suspect, he said. If you dig into this man's history, you'll find he's the one who carved that scar into Shanks's face. Robin's eyes widened. You're saying it was Tiki? I'd underestimated the black-bearded captain. Nathan nodded. The Whitebeard pirates have just lost one of their commanders, and their strength has taken a serious hit. You'd think now's the perfect moment to snap up a few of their islands. Robin frowned. So you want us to make our move against Whitebeard? He shook his head. Not yet. An all-out assault on Whitebeard's territory right now would throw the New World into chaos. Worse, if we attack, Kaido could swoop in and grab whatever scraps are left. Between the world government and the Navy, they'd pick our bones clean, Robin finished for him. Exactly, Nathan agreed. After such a blow to Whitebeard's fleet, everyone, from the Marines to the other emperors, will have their eyes locked on them. He glanced down at the crumpled newspaper on the table and tapped the date stamped in the corner. Year 21 of the Great Pirate Era. And don't forget, Luffy's about to set sail. Chapter X, the prologue of an era. Nathan folded the newspaper, his dark eyes fixed on the horizon. News had just come in that Luffy had landed on the Sabaody archipelago, not long before the long-feared Summit War was set to erupt. All across the seas, people were already calling this Nathan's era. To them, his name was synonymous with power, with destiny. But to Nathan himself, it felt like hollow praise. He knew his limits. He could stand toe-to-toe with one of the four emperors, but he wasn't bold enough to take on two at once. If this truly is my era, he mused, then it must be complete domination. He tapped the edge of the desk, as though stamping the statement into reality. The Summit War is only the overture. The real show, the real war, will define the next age, and that age will belong, me. Robin stood quietly by his side, her expression unreadable. She didn't need to ask what he meant. The charged silence in the room made the unspoken words heavy with promise. Nathan's thoughts were already racing ahead several steps, anticipating the world-shaking upheavals on the horizon. 2 weeks later, the seas roared with conflict. The beast pirates struck at Whitebeard's fleet with savage brutality. The red-haired pirates found themselves locked in a bloody skirmish against the 100 beasts. Even the Navy dared to push into the New World to challenge Whitebeard's power, only to be driven back in disgrace. It was chaos, carnage, and the opening act of the greatest spectacle the world had ever seen. And through it all, Nathan waited. This, he knew, was only the beginning. Soon the stage would be his in every sense of the word. Although Whitebeard had been defeated by Nathan and stripped of his title as the world's strongest, his continued presence and power kept the Whitebeard pirates from being easily dismantled. In the months that followed, the New World convulsed with conflict, one war after another. But the Ghost Hand pirates, one of the four emperors, held fast in the waters around the 10,000 kingdoms. They consolidated their forces within that realm and never ventured beyond its borders. Because Nathan himself took no aggressive action, no one dared to challenge him. Neither the Navy nor the other emperors, Kaido included, were willing to pick a fight with someone who'd already toppled Whitebeard. Throughout this time, Nathan devoted himself entirely to training. His extraordinary power sprang from the talent system, and with each session he unlocked new potential. A pivotal moment came when he destroyed Katakuri's lingering consciousness, a feat effectively as decisive as slaying the man himself. From that victory, Nathan gained 20 points of talent proficiency. His mastery over his distortion ability grew as well, nudging his distortion power rating up to 840 points. Each day saw him pushing the boundaries of his strength. As the world around him descended into chaos, Nethan remained focused, forging himself into an even more formidable force, one that no emperor, pirate crew, or navy fleet would dare underestimate. After several fierce battles, the chaos in the New World finally subsided. Neither the beast pirates nor the navy gained a clear advantage, and the seas settled into an uneasy calm. Yet beneath that stillness, dangerous currents stirred. It was now the 22nd year of the Great Pirate Era. The conflicts that had erupted across the New World felt like a distant memory, and the crisis that had almost overwhelmed the Whitebeard pirates was still fresh in everyone's minds. Just as the world began to catch its breath, an entirely unforeseen threat emerged in one of the four seas, the East China Sea, long considered the weakest since the execution of Pirate King Gall D. Roger. Without warning, thousands of savage beasts poured into the East China Sea, laying waste to coastal towns and kingdoms alike. In barely half a month, they left behind a trail of devastation. Countless lives lost, entire nations brought to ruin. Some of these creatures had escaped from confinement, others were ordinary wildlife, warped by mysterious experimental drugs. Each beast possessed strength far beyond human comprehension, shrugging off muskets and cannon fire as if they were mere annoyances. As news of the onslaught spread, shockwaves rippled through the world government. Never before had such a ferocious tide of monsters threatened the seas. Now every naval fleet and pirate crew would be forced to reckon with this new, terrifying menace. The assault of the beasts hadn't struck out of nowhere. It began with a threat letter sent by the Golden Lion Shiki to the world government, an unmistakable declaration of war. For 20 years, Shiki had been one of the 3 legendary pirates lying low after his prison city escape. Now he was back, and his warning warned of carnage to come. Inside the vaulted chamber of Pungal Castle, the 5 Elder Stars seethed with rage. The East Blue was already the weakest, and yet the most stable, sea under our control, one elder snarled. Now it's overrun by wild beasts. This is a direct blow to our authority. Another elder slammed his fist on the table. We can't afford this to spiral out of control. By the time their emergency conclave ended, 2 orders had gone out. The first instructed Navy headquarters to dispatch fleets and contain the outbreak at once. The second was a summons to the Shichibukai, pirates now on the government's payroll, but whose loyalties had grown shaky. Dracule Hawkeye Mihawk, the sea's deadliest swordsman, Jinbei, the former warlord known as the Knight of the Sea, and Bartholomew Kuma, the silent tyrant, each received an identical missive, sealed with the world government's emblem. The letter's final line named their rendezvous point, though none knew precisely what awaited them once they arrived. On the far side of the East China Sea, the corridors of Navy headquarters buzzed with alarm. Marshal John Guo stood frozen as the latest dispatch arrived, his face drained of color, but shock quickly gave way to fury. "Prepare every ship," he ordered in a thunderous voice. "Send our entire fleet and all available combat units to the East China Sea at once." News of the attack had already reached Vice Admiral Garp, now living in semi-retirement. Without hesitation, he'd reclaimed his old warship and set sail the moment he heard. Donghai was his home. If Fengche village fell to those savage beasts, what chance did its people have? An icy hatred coiled in his chest. On deck, Garp's usual grin was gone. He leaned on the rail, fists clenched so tightly his knuckles turned white. His voice was low and fierce. "Golden Lion? Shiji." Never had he been so enraged. If he found that creature this time around, he vowed he'd beat him senseless. Chapter 383, Heading for the East China Sea. Aboard the Moby Dick in the New World, Whitebeard sat propped against the bulwark, a half-empty bottle cradled in one hand and a newspaper spread before him. He frowned as he read aloud to himself, "Golden Lion." After all these years, he's finally made a move. The memory of Golden Lion's prison break 2 decades ago was as vivid as ever. He'd slipped free, paid Whitebeard a clandestine visit, shared a drink, and warned he'd vanish for a while. 20 years of silence had followed, until today. Thousands of miles away on the Subodi archipelago, Silvers Rayleigh stood behind the counter of a dimly lit bar, bottle of wine in hand, eyes dark with worry as he studied the same newspaper. "Right now," he muttered, Roger and Whitebeard had clashed more than once, but they'd also sat together over rum. The Golden Lion, however, had always been their bitterest foe. His sudden reappearance in the East China Sea was the kind of news that made even Rayleigh's calm resolve twist into concern. If he were a man in his prime, he'd have set sail already. And somewhere far out at sea, a lone, ghostly ship drifted with the currents, its sails tattered, marking the first stirrings of a voyage that would soon shake the very spine of the oceans. Before Nethin's small boat drifted into view, the sea was almost calm, until he rounded the hull of a wrecked warship, and his blood ran cold. Dozens of shattered vessels lay half-submerged, their timbers splintered. Dark water swirled with the bodies of Admiral Creek's sailors, their once proud crimson and gold pennants floating like bloody confetti. On one battered ship still afloat, Nethin spotted a lone figure. The man sat casually in a tiny rowboat tied to the stern, surveying the carnage with the calm detachment of someone who'd merely cleaned his sword. He wore a broad-brimmed hat that cast his eyes in shadow. Nethin's heart skipped. This was no ordinary pirate. This was Hawkeye Mihawk, the world's greatest swordsman. Wordless, Mihawk nudged his skiff away from the ruin, heading toward the last surviving vessel of Creek's fleet. Nethin watched as the swordsman's blade glinted in the dying light, and then he heard it. The unmistakable trill of a den-den mushi clipped to Mihawk's belt. With the same ease he would lift a teacup, Mihawk held the shell to his ear. On the other end, a clipped voice crackled through, a direct order from the world government. The 7 warlords of the sea were to assemble immediately at Chiwuhai. Mihawk paused only a moment, then relayed the details of Admiral Creek's defeat before ending the transmission. As he set the den-den mushi aside, Mihawk's rare, thoughtful expression settled over his sharp features. "Shiki, the Golden Lion," he murmured, an echo of reverence in his voice. Like Roger and Whitebeard, Shiki was a legend of the last era, but back then, he'd been famed merely as a master swordsman, not the greatest in the world. Mihawk rose, gripping his oar with purpose. He glanced once more at the shattered fleet, then turned his gaze westward where the sun dipped below the horizon. Without a word or backward look, he propelled the little boat toward the distant waters of the East Blue. Nethin gripped his own oar, curiosity and awe warring in his chest. Whatever lay ahead, Shiki's summons, the gathering of the warlords, or a new storm on the horizon, one thing was certain: the seas would never be the same again. Nethin had no real intention of rushing toward the world government's summons about Chibuhai, but with time to kill at sea, there was no harm in investigating. Rumors from Hawkeye lingered in his mind. This so-called Creek fleet was said to be the strongest force in the East Blue. Now, Chibuhai's urgent call had unleashed a massive naval mobilization. On top of that, one of the 3 legendary pirates, Golden Lion Shiki, had surfaced, rallying a small armada of crews under his banner. For a moment, every eye in the world was fixed on the East Blue. Far above, on Sky Island Bika, Nethin received the new in the palace almost the instant word reached the heavens. He stared down at the dispatches in disbelief. In his mind, Shiki's experiments on mutated beasts had been halted. He'd even believed Luffy had defeated Shiki before any new outbreak, and Luffy could hardly have been at sea long enough for this chaos to spawn naturally. Could it be my doing? Nethin wondered, a flicker of unease passing through him. In fact, Nethin's suspicion was spot on. He'd struck a serious blow against the Golden Lion. After witnessing Nethin's victory over Whitebeard, the Golden Lion was shaken to his core. He accelerated his own plans and struck ahead of schedule. The world government, alarmed by reports of the Golden Lion unleashing savage beasts across the East Blue, issued an emergency summons to the Shichibukai. Even the Navy dispatched an entire fleet. They say Vice Admiral Karp raced back to the East Blue overnight. Standing at his side, Robin asked softly, "What are you going to do now?" Her voice was calm, but an undercurrent of ice ran through it. She was clearly furious at the Golden Lion's wanton slaughter. An emergency call to the Shichibukai? The world government must be seething. Nethin shook his head, a cool, indifferent glint in his eyes. That man, the Golden Lion, I still owe him a reckoning. Nethin had long ordered his intelligence troops to keep an eye on the Golden Lion, but tracking a creature that never descended below 10,000 meters was like hunting a ghost. Year after year, it circled the skies, invisible unless it chose to reveal itself. So when word came that the Golden Lion had finally descended into the East China Sea and was laying waste to everything in its path, Nathan knew this was his chance. The world was his domain, and an out-of-control beast ravaging one of his seas was an offense he couldn't ignore, especially given the old grudge between them. He stood abruptly and turned to Robin. "Send for Ye Xiao. I want him at once." Robin nodded, retrieved his Den Mushi, and summoned Admiral Fujitora with a brief message. Nathan had no intention of taking Robin along on this run. With the Chiwuhai summoning order now active and the Navy mobilizing en masse, alongside Garp's fleet and possibly Dragon and the Revolutionary Army, the East China Sea had become a boiling pot of rival forces. And right in the middle of it all sat the Golden Lion, waiting. Nathan studied the reports one last time. Robin's abilities were impressive, but against Hawkeye, Tyrant Bear, and the Admirals, even he would be outmatched. He couldn't rely on Robin alone for protection. That was why he'd insisted on bringing Fujitora. The Admiral's power of flight would be indispensable in the East China Sea. There was, however, one complication. If Fujitora left the 10,000 kingdoms, Shiryu of the Rain would no longer be held in check. Still, Nathan was confident that Shiryu wouldn't dare defy his orders or stir up trouble in his absence. Everything about this operation felt too perfectly timed to be a coincidence. The Straw Hat Pirates were sailing straight into a crucible of fire. At the thought of Luffy and his crew stumbling into this lethal trap, Nathan couldn't suppress a dark chuckle. Between the savage beast incursions, the King's call to arms across the Chibuhai, and the Navy's massive fleets converging on the region, the East China Sea had effectively become a war zone, just the kind of battlefield Nathan had orchestrated. And the Straw Hats? They hadn't even reached the Grand Line yet. If luck turned against them, they might very well perish in these waters before ever seeing a new horizon. Nathan leaned back in the fleeting glow of the command room's hollow projector. "I've already notified Admiral Fujitora," he began, watching Robin's reaction closely. She raised an eyebrow. "You told him what exactly?" Taking a steadying breath, Nathan continued. "The Straw Hats aren't just some nameless rookies. Their captain is none other than Vice Admiral Garp's grandson, and their cook, Sanji, is Reiju's younger brother." Robin's composed features flickered with surprise. "Garp's own grandson, running off to become a pirate?" Nathan nodded. "Yes, and his father commands the Revolutionary Army." Robin's hand flew to her mouth. "The dragon is Garp's son?" "Exactly," Nathan confirmed. "It's a secret only dragon, Garp, and a very select few know. Not even Ivankov has heard word of it." The gravity of the revelation settled between them. Robin met his eyes. "If we dig deeper, we can find proof?" "If you probe their crew files and track their recent movements," Nathan said, "the clues are there. We just need to know where to look." Chapter 384, The Three Great Powers, East China Sea. A small sailboat cut through the waters of the East China Sea, its single sail full of wind. 6 men stood on deck, each absorbed in his own thoughts. "Wait, are you really planning to take only the 5 of us into the Grand Line?" Sanji exhaled a plume of cigarette smoke and glanced warily at Luffy. Nathan cracked his knuckles and stretched lazily. "I can't wait to get Nami back on board. Once she's here, we'll set off right away." He flashed a grin. "She may have run off with the Golden Mary, but she's our navigator now. She knows these seas." Sanji scowled out over the rolling waves. He didn't fully understand the Grand Line, but he'd heard enough horror stories to know it wasn't a place to take lightly, no matter how headstrong Luffy was. Luffy rubbed his chin, eyes gleaming. "Once we've gathered all our nakama, the Grand Line will be ours. It's a paradise." "A paradise?" Sanji snorted. "More like a graveyard for pirates." He shot a pointed look at Nathan. "Tell me you don't really believe that bliss and treasures fairy tale." Nathan chuckled, excitement bubbling in his chest. "That's exactly what our boss said when he left the restaurant. Some call the Grand Line paradise, others swear it's the devil's playground. Either way, it's the ultimate adventure." Before anyone else could speak, a terrified shout came from the stern. Johnny, Sauron's younger brother, paled and pointed at the horizon. "Brothers, look, someone's coming fast." All 6 men tensed, eyes fixed on the distant silhouette rapidly growing larger on the water. Whatever, or whoever it was heading straight for them. Johnny wiped a bead of sweat from his brow and fixed Luffy and the others with an earnest look. "You probably don't know much about the Grand Sky Route," he began. "But trust me, if we crack its secrets this time, Sauron will definitely want to tag along when we get back. Now, lunch is ready, so let's eat." Luffy stretched lazily and paid Johnny no mind. Irritated, Johnny jabbed a finger in the air. "Hey, listen, do you know why they call the Grand Sky Route the Pirate's Grave? It's because 3 immense powers claim it, and one of them is the 7 warlords of the sea." "The 7 warlords?" Luffy and the others exchanged curious glances. Johnny nodded gravely. "Right, they're officially sanctioned pirates, known as the Shichibukai, authorized by the world government. They pillage independent nations and crush any rogue crews that don't answer to the government. They're its enforcers, and they're terrifyingly strong. Remember Hawkeye, the one who defeated Sauron? He's one of the Shichibukai." At the mention of Hawkeye's name, Sauron, leaning against the ship's railing, flickered his gaze toward them, his expression unreadable. It didn't take long to dress Nethin's wound. His vitality was so strong that a thin scab had already formed beneath the bandages. Usopp's eyes widened as he stared at Dracul, Hawkeye Mihawk. 6 other fighters as strong as him? He breathed, horror creeping into his voice. Johnny wiped sweat from his brow. "And that's only one of the 3 great powers," he said, voice tight. "We're talking about the warlords of the sea." A hush fell over the group. Every one of them had tangled with the Marines. Luffy himself had once gone up against a Navy colonel alongside Zoro. Yet even veterans like them bristled at the reminder of the world government's might. Johnny met each of their gazes in turn, Luffy, Zoro, Sanji, and Nethin, then drew a slow, controlled breath. His expression grew darker still. "The 2nd power is the Navy headquarters," he continued, voice low. "And the 3rd," he paused, letting the weight of the words settle, "is the 4 emperors." Silence stretched across the deck. Sanji exhaled a thin plume of smoke, eyes narrowing. The 4 emperors, the 4 most feared pirates in all the seas. They knew then just how deep the ocean's shadows ran, and how small they truly were. They are so powerful that not even the world government or the Navy dares challenge them. Anyone who provokes one of the 4 emperors invariably meets a gruesome fate. "They're practically sovereigns of the sea," Johnny growled, voice low. "Kaido's supposed to have an immortal body, and then there's that one-armed pirate. Everyone says his strength is unmatched anywhere in the world." Luffy's eyes lit up. "Then it's decided. Once we find Nami, we set sail straight away." Johnny stared at him in disbelief, as if Luffy's head would pop right off. "Are you insane? Do you have any idea how terrifying the Yonko are? You're talking about the biggest fish in the ocean." But Luffy was already bounding for the companionway, grinning ear to ear. Zoro and the others exchanged a look, shrugged, and fell in behind him. Under a cloudless sky, a small sailboat crept toward the northwest coast of the East Blue, toward Kokoyashi Village, Nami's home. For the past several years, the village had been under the iron rule of the fishman Arlong. Soon, help would arrive, but whether it would be friend or foe, nobody could say. On the small skiff, 2 figures faced one another. Nethin sat clutching a sturdy wooden staff, his scarred eyelids squeezed tight as though warding off an unseen storm. Across from him, his companion leaned against the boat's gunwale, every line of his face relaxed into an impassive mask. Around them, the sea was deceptively calm. Nethin opened his eyes and stood, bracing the staff against the deck. In the distance, the cluster of roofs and swaying palms marked Kokosia Village, still untouched. He let out a breath. "We're not too late," he said. The East China Sea stretched wide under a pallid sky. Captain Golden Lion's notorious flying pirates flag flew across half these waters now, and the captain had enlisted thousands of cutthroats. Yet even his swollen ranks were spread too thin to crush every port. The mutated beasts he'd unleashed first ravaged settlements in the southwest. Kokosia lay safely northwest of their rampage. Golden Lion's plan was viciously simple. He'd massacre innocent villagers to sow terror, force the world government into paralysis, then seize control of the East China Sea, and ultimately all the surrounding seas. If he succeeded here, no coastal town would be safe. Nethin tightened his grip on the staff. The wind tugged at his dark coat as he surveyed the distant shoreline. Beside him, his companion dropped the last vestige of nonchalance from his posture and met Nethan's gaze. "Then let's go," the younger man said quietly. Nethan nodded, determination flaring in his eyes. Together, they shifted the boat's course, aiming for Kokosia's shores and whatever horrors waited beyond the waves. Nethan had pieced together the same ominous reports everyone else had. A stretch of sea not far from Kokosia village had already fallen, and it was only a matter of time before the Golden Lion set its sights on the village itself. As long as he remained aloft, no one could predict where the Golden Lion might strike next, but it couldn't linger in the sky forever. Eventually, it would have to reveal itself. Still, Nethan had no intention of giving chase into the clouds. If the Golden Lion's grand ambition was to dominate the East China Sea, then Kokosia village would simply be its next stepping stone. Instead of running off in pursuit, he would hold his ground here and let the enemy come to him. After all, the government and the Navy would surely have learned of this same intelligence by now. Fujitora sat quietly on the deck, his long staff sword resting across his lap. With deliberate calmness, Nethan spoke. "I know what's coming," he said. "This time, I'm not here to negotiate. I'm here to settle an old score with the Golden Lion. If they dare show up and make trouble, we'll wipe them out on the spot." A faint gleam sharpened in Nethan's eyes, an aura of authority befitting one of the four emperors, a reminder that he was among the world's mightiest. He glanced toward the horizon, then back at Fujitora. "So what of the Eastern Sea? And the Admiral? Have we any word from them?" Nethan's voice rang out across the deck. "I intend to settle the score with the Golden Lion. Anyone foolish enough to stand in my way will be swept away alongside him." His stance was every bit as imperious as ever. Fujitora merely chuckled. He didn't know the full history of the feud between Nethan and the Golden Lion, but from the young man's conviction, it was clearly no ordinary rivalry. Besides, the Golden Lion's recent massacre in the East China Sea had left a stain on the seas and earned Fujitora's personal displeasure. So when he learned that Nethan planned to head straight into that region and that he was calling for allies, Fujitora had come at once. Nethan's haughty expression dissolved into a grin at the Admiral's arrival. But the moment of triumph was fleeting. His eyes flicked out to the open water, and his grin froze. On the distant horizon, a lone vessel cut through the waves. "That ship," Nethan whispered, breath-catching. "Could it be the Golden Mary?" Chapter 385. Do you know who Aaron is? Nethan hadn't pressed his intelligence network for updates on Luffy and the Straw Hats. The East China Sea was in turmoil. Pirate clashes, sudden storms, and shifting currents made any reliable information hard to come by. But one thing he knew for certain, Kokosia village was Nami's hometown. It was only a matter of time before their paths crossed. Both ships sailed close to Kokosia's rocky shore. Nethan deliberately left the currents unaltered, allowing the Going Merry to pick up speed and draw level with his own vessel, which was crewed by Admiral Fujitora and a small detachment under Nethan's command. As soon as Nethan's ship dropped anchor, the Merry slipped in beside them. Stepping onto the weather-beaten dock, Nethan and Fujitora barely had a moment to look around before a single burst of bright orange hair bounded from the Mary's deck. Nami, now 18, landed in a confident stance, her athletic figure every bit Robin's match, her cropped hair adding an extra spark of vitality. "Hey, you two," she cried, marching toward them with arms crossed and a challenge in her eyes. "Who are you, and what are you doing here?" Nethan and Admiral Fujitora stepped onto the quiet pier of Kokosia village. Outsiders rarely ventured this far, and whenever word reached the Murloc Aaron, his thugs would swoop in, seize every coin the newcomers carried, then hurl the helpless traveler's treasure into the sea. Nami, who'd witnessed that cruel spectacle too many times, didn't intend to stand by again. Nethan offered her a polite smile and said softly, "We're just passing through and hope to grab a quick bite before moving on." At once, Nami's expression turned icy. "No outsiders allowed. Leave, right now." Taken aback, Nethan paused to collect his thoughts. If she was alone on her boat, perhaps she'd commandeered Luffy's ship to return here, proof that Aaron still held sway over Kokosia. Her hostility suddenly made sense. Fujitora, leaning gently on his cane, inclined his head in apology. "Forgive the intrusion. Is this your territory?" Nami studied the blindfolded admiral's calm, honest eyes and the courteous tilt of his head. A blind man who spoke so kindly, these two hadn't come to do harm. She drew a deep breath. Under Aaron's rule, any stranger could expect to be robbed and banished, but these men, they deserved better than the fate she knew all too well. Nami's eyes narrowed, her gaze cold and imperious. "Do you even know who Aaron is?" she asked, voice tinged with steel. "This is Aaron's territory. There's nowhere safe to rest here. If you don't want to die, you'd be wise to leave right now." Fujitora scratched the back of his head, his expression puzzled. "Aaron," he repeated. "I'm terribly sorry, but I've never heard the name. Who is he?" Nami's lips curved into something like contemptuous amusement. It was clear to her now that these two had stumbled in by accident. No one with sense would dare set foot in Aaron's domain on purpose. "I don't care whether you've heard of him," she said crisply. "All you need to know is that sticking around will get you killed. Consider yourself warned." With that, she spun on her heel and strode off toward the island's interior. As her figure vanished among the palm fronds, Fujitora turned to his companion. Nethan nodded soberly. "She's right," he said. "Aaron's name carries real weight around here. The bounty on her head is 20 million berries." Fujitora's eyes went wide. "Oh, of course. We're in the East China Sea." Nethan frowned as he studied the wanted poster. The name, Aaron, was emblazoned underneath a strangely low bounty, nowhere near what you'd expect for someone rumored to rival the likes of the Shichibukai Mahawk. In fact, even Aaron's own lieutenants boasted higher bounties. "Something doesn't add up," Nethan muttered, an amused smile tugging at his lips. "He's hiding some serious muscle." "Indeed," Admiral Fujitora agreed, eyes narrowing softly behind his blindfold. "Aaron once sailed with the Sun Pirates alongside Jinbi. After Urarlok Tiger fell, Aaron and Jinbi went their separate ways." At the mention of Jinbi, the former Sun Pirate who rose to Shichibukai, Fujitora inclined his head. If Aaron had stood side by side with him, he was no pushover. Folding the poster, Nethan turned toward the island's overgrown interior. "Let's move," he said. Nami's warning had been clear. Vacate the area before the Golden Lion pirates struck again. Fujitora fell in beside him, and together they stepped into the dense undergrowth. Hours later, in Aaron Park, having dispatched Nethan and Fujitora with her urgent warning, Nami now made her way to Aaron Park. The sun-dappled path led her to a clearing where Aaron lounged on a deck chair, soaking up the rays. "Back so soon?" she called out, feigning irritation. "That was fast, even for you." Aaron looked up, grinning as he stretched languidly. "Miss me already?" he replied, his eyes sparkling with mischief. Nami had finally done it. Her painstaking efforts had earned her a total of 100 million bellies. To Aaron, she was the perfect navigator. Her sea charts alone were worth far more than any coin, and yet he'd sworn an oath he couldn't break. He was determined to honor his promise and still find a way to keep her under his thumb. Nami herself didn't suspect a thing. After all her toil, the dream of redeeming Kokoyashi village was within reach, and the ache of leaving Luffy and the others behind felt somehow more bearable. Just as Aaron beamed at his assembled followers and prepared to throw a grand feast in celebration, an earth-shaking roar tore through the air outside Aaron's garden. The sound struck like cannon fire, rattling every bone. Nami stumbled, her vision swimming as a high-pitched ringing filled her ears. She pressed trembling fingers to her temples, eyes wide with terror. "What on earth?" Aaron froze mid-greeting, his confident smile vanishing in an instant. His underlings exchanged nervous glances. None of them knew what had just happened. The ground itself seemed to pulse beneath their feet as that deafening roar echoed once more, closer, louder, and utterly unstoppable. Nethan approached the ramparts of Aaron's courtyard, glancing anxiously at his superior. "Boss Aaron, I just heard Colonel Mouse say that ferocious beasts have infested the nearby seas and attacked several islands." Aaron let out a cold snort. "Beasts? Ha! We Murlocs are the real predators. Come with me. We'll teach whatever's out there a lesson. Sounds like we'll have fresh meat for dinner tonight." He strode toward the gate, but before he could step outside, a deafening crash split the air. The courtyard wall exploded inward as a towering silverback ape, nearly 5 or 6 meters tall, burst through the breach. "Ah!" Nami shrieked and dove for cover behind a shattered stone pillar. Aaron's eyes flashed with fury as he surveyed the ruin. "You dare show your face here?" he snarled at the ape. With a roar, he charged forward, his battle glaive raised and ready to strike. Chapter 386. Bartholomew Bear, the massive silverback giant ape, bellowed in fury and swung a piston-powered fist straight at Aaron. Aaron's expression went stone cold as he met the blow with a brutal counterstrike of his own. There was a thunderous, bone-rattling crack as fist slammed into fist. For a heartbeat, neither combatant gave ground. Then Aaron's eyes widened in shock as the beast's strength drove him backward. He skidded across the packed earth and crashed to his knees several steps away, dust billowing around him. "Boss Aaron!" came a chorus of stunned cries from the murlocs clustered on the sidelines. Their species was famed for wrist strength 10 times that of a human's, and Aaron was their finest warrior. They'd banked a 20 million Bailey's bounty on his victory, certain no creature could stand against him. Yet here he sat, humbled by a single punch from Bartholomew Bear. Nami, who'd been watching from just beyond the ring, stared in disbelief. She'd known Bartholomew was formidable, but she'd never expected him to so effortlessly overpower Aaron. The image of her ally being cast aside like an empty barrel sent a chill through her. Aaron tasted blood. His chest heaved as he knelt, fury flaring in his eyes. He rose to his feet with a roar that shook the clearing. Muscles coiled like springs beneath his skin, and he charged once more at Bartholomew Bear, determined to prove that even the mightiest beast could be broken by his will. Nathan darted aside just in time to avoid the silver-backed gorilla's crushing blow. In a single, furious motion, he sank his teeth into the beast's leg, ripping through coarse fur as he tried to tear out flesh. But the gorilla's muscles were like steel. No matter how hard he bit, he couldn't free even a scrap. Against that massive body, his attack amounted to only a minor irritation. Enraged by the pain, the silverback reared up and delivered a thunderous backhand. Nathan went flying, slamming through the stone wall of Nathan Park in a shower of bricks and dust. Crouched in a shadowed corner, Nami's heart pounded in her chest. Nathan, her seemingly unstoppable leader, was being overwhelmed by this colossal ape that had appeared out of nowhere. Around them, the murlocs let out terrified shrieks. They drew spears and crude blades, surging forward to encircle the gorilla. But before any of them could strike, a deafening roar rolled in from outside the park gates. Brilliant streaks of icy light tore through the night air, shearing the surrounding walls into rubble. A hush fell over Aaron Park the instant the first monster appeared. Towering as high as the famed silverback giant ape, a colossal praying mantis strode into view, and then, impossibly, a second one followed. The onlooking murlocs, creatures usually brimming with bravado, went utterly still. Even from a distance, it was clear these mantises were no weaklings. They radiated lethal strength on par with the giant ape itself. Before anyone could recover from their shock, a shimmering curtain of white descended from the sky, draping over one corner of the park like a frozen waterfall of silk. Through it, a massive black spider slithered in, its body as large as the giant ape, its legs sharp enough to pierce armor. A collective shiver ran through the crowd at the sight. "Gudu," someone whispered, the name slipping out on a tremor of fear. Normally proud and warlike, the murlocs were now openly panicked, scrambling for cover or turning tail. The creatures circled each other, the mantises and the spider, as if sizing one another up for a deadly dance. In the far corner, Nami finally snapped back to reality. Earlier, she'd been dazed, her head still spinning from the moment the silverback ape had thrown Aaron into the air. Now, seeing these new threats, her face drained of color. Sure, the ape had sent Aaron flying, but in this maelstrom of horrors, what chance did any of them have? Nami clenched her fists. Fear hammered her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. If Aaron, or anyone, stood a chance at surviving this, they'd need every ounce of courage and cunning, and Nami was determined not to let panic claim them all. In the eyes of these creatures, we're no more than food. Nathan may have a ruthless reputation, but at least he didn't slaughter the entire village of Kokoshia. If these monsters overrun this place, it would be infinitely worse than anything Nathan might have done. Nami felt a cold sweat bead on her forehead as she stared at the advancing horde. Frantically, she clenched her teeth, silver fangs glinting in the dim light, trying to devise a plan. Yet no matter how she replayed the fight in her mind, she couldn't see a way to counter foes that even Nathan, with all his strength, struggled to handle. Her heart pounded in her chest, and panic threatened to overwhelm her. With a deafening roar, the silverback giant ape lunged at Nethan, who'd barely managed to catch his breath after the initial charge. Nethan sank his teeth into the beast's shoulder, but the creature didn't falter. Boom, boom, boom. The ape's massive fists pounded him over and over, each blow driving the air and any hope out of his lungs. At the same time, the smaller murlocs fared no better. The mantis monster pinned one against a crumbling wall, while the spider's venomous fangs sank into another. Their shrieks echoed through the clearing as limbs were ripped apart, and leaving nothing but carnage in the monster's wake. Nami's jaw dropped. All around her, the creatures fed and fought with feral hunger, an unstoppable tide of death that threatened to engulf them all. Aaron Park lay in utter ruin. Its walls were nothing but jagged rubble, and three massive beasts, creations of the Golden Lion, stalked the wreckage with brutal, unstoppable force. Nami's heart pounded, yet she felt no grim satisfaction at the Aaron pirate's plight. All she felt was a cold dread settling into her bones. From the far end of the field, two figures emerged, Nithan and Admiral Fujitora. The nearest monster, a hulking three-headed dragon, snarled as it caught sight of them. Fujitora's presence shifted the air. He exhaled slowly, unleashing a silent, intimidating aura, and his voice rumbled. "Three-headed dragon!" His hand moved toward his sword hilt. Before the blade could be drawn, Nithan lifted a hand to stop him. "Wait," he ordered coolly. "This evil dragon pirate group isn't to be underestimated. Let them make the first move." Fujitora's arm froze. Nami, drenched in cold sweat, watched in shocked silence. Why had Nethan and Fujitora ignored her warnings and walked straight into this hellscape? Fear twisted in her gut. This was far more dangerous than she ever imagined. What were they planning? Nami stormed over to where Nethan and Fujitora stood talking. She ground her teeth. "Get out of here. We'll be torn apart if we stay." Fujitora opened his mouth to protest, but Nethan held up a hand. "Not yet," he said, calm but insistent. "I can't signal evacuation until everything's clear." Nami's pulse raced. Is he out of his mind? Doesn't he see the three terrifying creatures lurking here? She was about to argue again when a blood-curdling scream shattered the air. Instinctively, she spun around and froze. The silverback giant ape had seized Murloc Aaron in one massive hand. With a roar that rattled the trees, it wrenched him apart, letting his torn torso thud to the ground. Aaron's final agonized cry echoed through the clearing before dying abruptly. Nami's face drained of color. Even Aaron hadn't stood a chance. Trembling, she glanced back at Nethan and Fujitora. Both men had snapped to attention, eyes fixed on the canopy above. There, perched on a rocky ledge, the mantid creature crouched with its scythe-like forearms slick with blood. Moments ago, it had torn the other two murlocs limb from limb, and was now crunching their remains between its mandibles like so many fish bones. Nami's stomach lurched at the sickening crack, but as the creature straightened and turned toward them, she realized with icy certainty that this grotesque feast was only the beginning. Now, the monster's true target was coming into view. I watched in disbelief as an unseen force slammed into the creature's head. Its movements froze, then crack! Its skull burst open. The mantis monster trembled once, twice, and collapsed. Through the settling dust, a single figure emerged. He towered nearly 7 meters tall, clad in black and white, cradling a heavy tome in his arms. Nami stared, speechless, her eyes wide with shock. Could this one man really have slain that massive mantis? "Tyrant Bear, Bartholomew," Nethan murmured, recognizing him immediately. Ever since the government issued its urgent summons to Chiwuhai, Tyrant Bear had naturally been on call, and his reputation for lightning-fast response was well-earned. His rapid arrival held no surprise for Nethan. Chapter 387, Nami's Shock. Nethan stood beside Nami, watching the hulking figure approach. He broke the tense silence. "That's Bartholomew Kuma." "Bartholomew Bear?" Nami echoed in disbelief, her eyes widening. She turned to Nethan. "He's called Kuma, Bear, but he's a pirate?" Nethan nodded. "More than that, Kuma is one of the 7 warlords of the sea, officially allied with the world government. He ate the pawpaw fruit, which lets him repel anything with a mere touch, even air. They say his palms can strike you so hard you're sent flying through mountains." Nami's breath caught. "What's his bounty?" she asked, her voice trembling. 296 million berries. Nethan replied. 296 million? Nami staggered, her vision blurring. That's 10 times Murloc Aaron's reward. How do you even wrap your head around that? Nithan placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. It's hard to believe, but that's the world we're in. Before Nami could respond, Kuma moved again. In a swift, silent motion, he dispatched the giant mantis creature with a single repelling palm strike. Then his form shimmered and vanished from sight. Nami's heart pounded as she watched him reappear in an instant, this time standing directly in front of the silverback gorilla beast, ready to engage. Nethan didn't hesitate. These mutated beasts were too dangerous to toy with. He raised his massive, bear-like paw and brought it crashing down on the silverback ape's skull. With a thunderous crack, the blow shattered bone and drove the creature's body flush into the earth. No sooner had the ape fallen than Nethan streaked toward the spider monster, sweeping his paw through the air. A concussive blast ripped through its carapace, and the spider's legs twitched once before going limp. From the moment Nethan, the so-called tyrant bear, had appeared to the instant all three abominations lay dead, barely a few seconds had passed. Standing off to the side, Nami could only stare, her heart pounding so fiercely she thought her ribs would burst. Nethan, however, didn't even seem aware of her. Ross, now Nethan's comrade or Fujitora, his attention snapped instead to the shattered gates of Aaron Park. Ha! Well, well, Bartholomew, a voice drawled from the shadows. A squat man with a ruddy, weather-beaten nose stepped forward, a wine gourd dangling from his belt. He offered the tyrant bear a crooked grin, utterly unafraid of the monster before him. Nethan watched in silence as Basolo Mixiong's cold gaze settled on the man standing a short distance away. With measured calm, Basolo asked, "So you've thrown in your lot with the Golden Lion pirates, Basque Chote?" Across the clearing, Basque Chote squared off against Bartholomew, his posture daring and unyielding. Nami's racing heart finally began to slow as she recognized the tension between the two figures. Who is that man? She wondered. Nethan narrowed his eyes. The name Basque Chote sounded familiar. He'd heard rumors of a pirate destined for the Blackbeard crew, one who'd been locked away on level 6 of Impel Down in Advanced City. Clearly, Chote had seized the chaos of that prison's recent upheaval to break free, and then aligned himself with the Golden Lions. Basque Chote? Nami repeated, surprise and uncertainty warring in her tone. Nethan confessed he didn't know many hard facts, until Admiral Fujitora, standing beside them, spoke up quietly. He's a vicious pirate, Fujitora said. Over 10 years ago, in a drunken rampage, he massacred several coastal towns. The Navy slapped a 400 million berry bounty on his head, and thought they'd locked him away for good. Fujitora tightened his grip on the hilt of his staff sword, a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. 400 million berries? Nami's heart skipped. 400 million! What kind of monsters were these men to carry bounties that high? She'd spent 10 years scraping together 100 million berries to free Kokoshia from Murloc Aaron's clutches. Now, the reward offered by each of these two rivals dwarfed her Eiffelong dream. Bartholomew spoke up without preamble, his voice calm and steady. If your plan succeeds, where will the Golden Lion be? Basque unslung the wine gourd from his back and took a long, sloshing draw. He smirked. You think I'd just tell you that so easily? Bartholomew regarded him coolly for a moment, then peeled off his black gloves with deliberate slowness. Basque whistled low, eyes glinting with interest. I've heard rumors. You've stood at the head of the 7 warlords of the sea for years now. Tell me, are you any stronger than you used to be? Bartholomew offered a single, dismissive snort. You'll find out soon enough. In the next instant, Bartholomew Bear thrust out a massive palm strike, his meatball fruit power flaring to life, and sent a bear's paw-shaped shockwave ripping through the air. Unfazed, Basque met the attack head-on with a crushing fist of his own. Boom! Their blows collided in a thunderous roar. The impact sent ripples through the air, and the sheer force radiated outward in a terrifying gale. That lingering air blast slammed into Nami, knocking her off balance. She staggered backward, stumbling 5 or 6 steps before her legs gave out. As she fell, she crashed straight into Nethan's chest. Instinctively, Nethan caught her, steadying her so she didn't hit the ground. Nami blinked up at him, her heart pounding. What on earth were those two? Were they even human? She forced herself to stand, leaning briefly against Nithan for support. All the while, her wide eyes stayed locked on Bartholomew and Basque as they squared off again, each breath they drew crackling with raw power. Boom! Boom! Their next exchange of blows promised even greater devastation. Nithan's ears rang as the arena erupted around him. Years of imprisonment had done little to strengthen him, and he was no match for Bartholomew, the so-called tyrant bear. After more than a dozen exchanges, Nithan already staggered under the weight of the bear's blows. Bartholomew moved like lightning, appearing at Nithan's side and slamming him against the stone floor. Pain seared through Nithan's ribs, and he tasted blood. The bear's cold voice rang out, "Tell me where the golden lion is hidden, or this ends now." Defiance flared in Nithan's eyes. Despite every nerve screaming to yield, he forced himself to his feet. He swallowed his pain, let out a furious roar, and charged. Their clash shook the arena. Fists and claws struck stone so hard it splintered. Dust roiled in great clouds as Nithan and Bartholomew exchanged blow after blow, neither willing to give ground. High above, Nami watched with growing horror. She had known Eren to be strong, but Bartholomew made even Eren look like a helpless fish. If the bear could do this to Nithan, what chance did the villagers of Kokosia have? Her heart pounded. Nithan fought with everything in him, but he was bleeding fast, and Bartholomew only grew more relentless. Nami leapt to her feet, calling down to the attendants below. "We have to get everyone out of here. Now! Don't stop for anything." As the crowd began to stir in panic, Nami prayed Nithan could hold on long enough for the villagers to escape. The roar of the tyrant bear drowned out all reason, but she refused to let fear paralyze her, not when so many lives hung in the balance. Nami's eyes widened with worry as she turned toward the village. "We have to warn everyone. Get them off the island," she cried, already taking a step forward. Nithan reached out and gently caught her arm. "Don't," he said firmly. "If the villagers try to flee by sea, they'll run straight into the mutant beasts swarming offshore." Nami hesitated, panic flickering across her face. "Then what do we do?" He gave her a calm, steady look. "We keep them here, for now. No one's going to wander into the battle zone on their own. As long as they stay well clear of the central fighting, they'll be safe." Nami let out a shaky breath and nodded. Relief washed over her features, and she glanced at Nithan with surprise. He'd never seemed so composed before, especially not in the middle of chaos. Yet here he was, cool and confident, and for the first time that day, she believed they might just pull through. Chapter 388. Qingji appears. Bartholomew Bear and Basque were locked in a furious clash, each strike echoing like thunder through the clearing. Suddenly, a blinding aura of sword energy tore through the air toward Basque, a crackling force that promised to slice through any defense. Basque's eyes widened. He spun on his heel, just barely evading the blade's shimmering trail, but not by much. The edge of the sword energy nicked his cheek, drawing a thin line of blood. In an instant, that same force streaked across the battlefield, carving a deep gouge through the fractured terrain of Eren Park and extending all the way to the horizon. The rushing sound of splitting earth was deafening. "Ah!" Nami's scream split the air. She stumbled backward, terror etched on her face. The sword aura had passed barely 10 meters from where she'd been standing. When the brilliance finally faded, the newly formed chasm yawned before her like an abyss. Her voice trembled as she struggled to find her footing. What was that?" Nami's gaze swept toward the source of the attack. There, standing motionless against the otherworldly glow, was a man clad in black. His long trench coat fluttered in the breeze, and atop his head sat a tall top hat. In his hand gleamed a broad, ebony blade, its surface catching the last glimmers of dissipating light. He said nothing, only watched. The battlefield fell silent in his wake. Even Bartholomew Bear and Basque halted, their fierce contest suspended as they stared, mouths agape. The newcomer's calm presence seemed to absorb all the tension around him, leaving only the echo of his arrival. Nami's heart pounded in her chest. Who was this mysterious swordsman, and why had he intervened so decisively? As the dust settled, the single question on everyone's mind was the same. What power did he wield, and what did he intend to do next? Nithan's eyes flicked to the stranger standing across from Basque, a man so calm and composed his very posture seemed to still the morning air. He nudged Nami and whispered, That's one of the 7 warlords of the sea, the Shichibukai, known as Hawkeye Mihawk. He's the world's greatest swordsman. Nami's heart hammered in her chest. The world's greatest swordsman? She breathed. She didn't know a single thing about swordplay, but everyone on the Grand Line spoke of Mihawk with equal parts awe and terror. Why on earth had Kokoschia drawn such formidable attention? Below them, Mihawk's black blade had just sliced through the air toward Basque, nicknamed Tyrant Bear for his brute strength. Basque's massive frame tensed, then he sidestepped in one easy motion, the swing of the sword barely grazing empty sky. To everyone's surprise, Mihawk didn't press the attack. With a serene flick of his wrist, he sheathed the blade and took a deliberate step back. Basque, who moments before had exuded unshakable confidence, now stood rigid, a bead of sweat trailing down his temple. He muttered under his breath, 2 of the king's own Shichibukai on Kokoschia? Tyrant Bear might handle one, but with Mihawk here, we're in serious trouble. Before that thought could fully form, a deep, mocking voice rang out from the shadows at the far end of the plaza. Hawkeye, I never imagined you'd answer the world government's summons. Across the morning haze, all eyes turned to the newcomer, and the tension on Kokoschia's docks snapped tauter than any blade. A man emerged from the distance, a gleaming western sword hanging at his hip. A cruel smile tugged at his lips as his dark eyes fixed on Hawkeye. Hawkeye met his gaze without a flicker of surprise. A bait screw, Hawkeye said quietly. Screw's grin widened. You know me? It'd be strange if I didn't, Hawkeye replied evenly. I'm intrigued by the Golden Lion's plan, and I intend to see it through. If you stand in my way, then I have no choice but to fight. With that, a bait screw drew his sword in a single, fluid motion, the blade singing as it slid free of its scabbard. Farther up the hill, Admiral Fujitora leaned on his wooden cane, watching the exchange with calm curiosity. His deep voice carried down to them on the warm breeze. So this pirate hunter, a bite screw, he's pledged himself to the Golden Lion? Nami, standing beside Nethan, felt her heart skip a beat. They'd both sensed something monumental was about to happen. Nethan folded his arms, studying Screw's sword with interest. A bite screw is famed for hunting down and killing a pirate with a 450 million berry bounty. He's considered the strongest swordsman among the marine hunter ranks. None of us expected he'd fall under the Golden Lion's command. Nami's eyes widened. Then, who exactly is this Golden Lion? Nethan met Nami's anxious gaze and began, his voice low and steady. Long before the Great Pirate Era, the world was shaped by legendary captains, Gol D. Roger, the Pirate King, and Edward Newgate, the Whitebeard. They clashed in countless battles, even driving Roger himself to the brink of defeat. Nami's heart pounded so fiercely she feared it might burst. Just as Nethan paused, Hawkeye, known across the seas as the world's greatest swordsman, shifted his focus to Scrooge. With a fluid motion, he unleashed the jet-black blade Yaya from its sheath. I have no interest in your schemes, Hawkeye declared, his tone amused. Ho-ho, the honor of facing you in combat is entirely mine. A fierce light ignited in Scrooge's eyes. As a fellow swordsman, he could not resist such a challenge. He tightened his grip on his hilt and leapt forward in a single, lethal motion. In that instant, a storm of ebony sword energy roared from Scrooge's blade, tearing through the air like thunder, ripping open the sky. Hawkeye met the assault with a powerful backhand strike, unleashing a radiant arc of gleaming chi. Their opposing energies met in a cataclysmic collision, a deafening boom that rent the silence. Blades of light and shadow intertwined, then detonated in a blinding flash. Shards of raw sword energy cascaded outward, gouging fissures into the earth beneath their feet. The ground trembled. The sky itself thundered, and thus began a duel destined to echo through legend. Nami's scream rang out again as the ground within 3 meters of her split open into twin chasms, carved by the reverberating shards of sword energy. Nethan stepped back and frowned. He'd been striding around with all the confidence in the world, hunting for any sign of the Golden Lion, but so far, there was nothing. Boom, boom. The 4 combatants on the field, Tyrant Bear, Hawkeye, and 2 others, exchanged such furious blows that each impact sent shockwaves rippling through the air. Tyrant Bear and Hawkeye proved perfectly matched. Neither could gain the upper hand. Aaron Park, by contrast, had been reduced to a smoldering ruin, his form shattered beyond repair. Watching those devastating strikes land one after another, Nami felt her mind go numb. Just as the brutal duel seemed poised to continue without end, a sudden rush of frigid air swept over the battlefield. At its edge, a lone figure materialized, cloaked in navy blue emblazoned with the word justice, riding a bicycle straight toward them. The bicycle wheels spun, and with each rotation, the earth beneath froze solid, ruts and rocks vanishing into a flawlessly smooth sheet of ice. Nami sat beside the riders, her senses tingling into numbness as she watched the battlefield unfold. Around her, Hawkeye, Boreas, and other titans of power demonstrated feats that left her feeling like a lone minnow in a shark tank. They weren't merely strong, they were monsters, not quite human. Beside her, however, were two far more familiar faces. Admiral Chingji of Navy Headquarters and a young man named Nethan. Though neither matched the sheer raw might of the others, their presence grounded her. Nethan's calm, unreadable expression as he guided his bicycle onto the ice made the corner of Nami's mouth tug in surprise. She'd never met anyone above the rank of Major General before. An admiral and this quietly confident rider? It felt unreal. Nethan brought his bicycle to a smooth stop, a few feet off the makeshift road, frost drifting off his tires like mist. He gave Nami a steady nod and then leaned his bike against a snowbank. A short distance away, Admiral Chingji coasted to a halt, tossed his helmet aside, and ruffled his hair with an amused grin. He propped his bicycle upright and strode toward the fray. He wasn't about to let Xiong and the others face the enemy alone. Nethan stared down at the rampaging Golden Lion. Its destruction had already drawn too much attention. If he didn't put it down immediately, neither Navy Headquarters nor the world government would accept any excuses. He took a measured step forward, grit crunching beneath his boots. Concentrating his devil fruit power, he slammed his open palm against the ground. Ice Age! A pale blue frost radiated outward from his hand, crawling across the earth in a widening circle. Beneath its touch, rock and soil crystallized, freezing solid within moments. The Golden Lion roared in fury as its blazing mane stiffened. Steam hissed from its paws where the ice gripped tight. Nethan advanced steadily, sealing every avenue of escape. Now, with the battlefield locked in a frozen grip, only one question remained. Could he end the beast before the world's powers closed in? Chapter 389. Chingji's palm slammed down, and the earth beneath her touch crystallized into ice, fanning out in every direction. In an instant, the once bustling Aaron Park was gone, replaced by a frozen wasteland. The ice surged into the gap between Basque and the tyrant bear, snapping shut around Basque's legs and waist and pinning him half to the ground. Nami stood frozen, her face blank. On her left, Nethan and Admiral Fujitora were equally motionless. Only when she saw their unmoving expressions did reality snap back, and a surge of panic washed over her. "Damn it," she whispered under her breath. Basque himself had noticed Chingji's arrival, but he'd been locked in brutal combat with the tyrant bear and couldn't respond in time. Now, with half his body encased in ice, he roared in fury and unleashed his conqueror's haki in a desperate bid to shatter the bindings. But the tyrant bear pressed its massive paw harder against Basque's chest. A crackling shockwave tore through Basque's body. He spat blood onto the ice, the scarlet droplets stark against the frozen ground, and his breath came in ragged gasps. The battle hung in the balance, both sides reeling from the sudden turn of events. "I never expected to find you here, Basque. Escaping the City of Advancement is no small feat," Chingji said as he strode forward, eyeing the strange object in Basque's hand. He scratched the back of his head, then seized on a new thought. "That Golden Lion guy has been nothing but trouble. Do you know when he's going to show up?" Basque chuckled, the sound light and teasing. "You think the Golden Lion boss is coming here? Not a chance." Chingji's brow furrowed. "Then where is he right now?" "With whom, up in the sky?" Basque replied, grinning broadly. He stuck out his tongue and licked his lips. "As for the exact spot, sorry, you're never going to find it, no matter how hard you look." Impatient with Basque's riddles, Chingji pivoted to the ongoing fight between Screw and Hawkeye. He didn't trust Basque's words, so he moved in, incanting a spell that plunged the area into an instant ice age. Hawkeye frowned at the interruption but didn't argue. He sheathed Heidaoya on his back with a silent nod. Chingji's frost magic seized half of Screw's body in solid ice, freezing him in place and neutralizing his attack. Shinji pressed his fingers to his temples, wincing as another headache threatened. He glared down at Scrooge, who knelt before him, and spoke in a harsh, clipped tone. "Tell me plainly, why were you sent here?" Scrooge met Shinji's gaze without flinching. His voice was slow, almost listless, but his answer was identical to Baska's. "We were dispatched by the Golden Lion. Nothing more." A low curse escaped Shinji's lips. Capturing Scrooge and Bask should have been a triumph, but without the Golden Lion himself, it was meaningless. He leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Do you realize where his true base lies?" Scrooge merely shrugged. Shinji bit back a retort. The Golden Lion's headquarters hovered on a cluster of islands drifting at 10,000 meters. These floating landmasses shifted unpredictably across the sky. Locating them was like chasing clouds. It was a mission all but impossible. Shinji straightened, exasperated. He glanced around. Neither Hawkeye nor the Tyrant Bear showed any interest in helping. Hawkeye casually slung his sword over his shoulder and walked away, while the Tyrant Bear stood aloof at the edge of the clearing, engrossed in a thick volume, his eyes sweeping coldly over the proceedings. A few hundred meters off, Nethan and Vice Admiral Fujitora, better known as Nami, watched the scene unfold. Nethan shook his head, dark eyes troubled. He stepped forward, ready to intervene, but paused when Fujitora raised a hand to stop him. The pair remained statuesque, silently weighing their next move, as Shinji continued to press Scrooge for answers, any hint of where to find the Golden Lion's elusive fortress. Nethan shook his head. Relying on the Navy had gotten them nowhere. He would have to do the interrogation himself. With that thought, he started forward. Nami stood frozen, panic rising in her chest. When she realized Nethan was heading straight toward Shinji and the others, who were clustered near the cave's mouth, she bolted after him. "Hey! What are you doing? I'll try to get some useful information." Without slowing, Nethan called over his shoulder, "I've got this covered," and kept moving. Nami's eyes widened in horror. "Are you out of your mind? There are monsters out there." From just behind her, Admiral Fujitora stepped forward with a kind smile. He laid a reassuring hand on her arm before she could dart toward Nethan. "It'll be fine," he said gently. Nami shook him off, her voice trembling. "Fine? You can't even see them. How do you know what you're walking into?" But before she could say more, everyone, Shinji, Hawkeye, the Tyrant Bear, and the rest of their party turned to look. One by one, they caught sight of Nethan striding bravely into the darkness, and surprise flickered across each of their faces. No one was more stunned than the onlookers, not because Nethan had shown up here, but because he'd seemingly materialized out of thin air. There had been no warning, no portal, no sign of movement, nothing to explain his arrival. Before anyone could gather their thoughts, Fujitora and Nami appeared behind him just as suddenly, as though they'd been standing there the entire time. If it had only been Nethan, they might have chalked it up to a trick of light or speed beyond human perception. But the three of them? All three had just stood into existence together, and nobody had noticed a thing. The realization hit like an ice sword. Hawkeye's face drained of color. He'd been itching to test himself against Nethan, to see just how far they really differed in strength. But this, whatever sorcery or devil fruit ability was at play here, left him speechless. Shinji drew in a sharp breath, his body already half encased in frost as he instinctively entered his peak defensive stance. His eyes, cold and unblinking, locked onto Nethan. Whatever power they were facing, it was dangerous enough to demand complete vigilance. Silence fell across the assembly. Every heartbeat thundered in their ears as they waited for a move, each one ready for a fight they never saw coming. Nethan's heart pounded in his chest. Even with Dracule, Hawkeye Mihawk, and Bartholomew Tyrant Kuma standing before him, he couldn't afford to relax. Not for a moment. What if they intended to attack him? And even if they held back, Ben Beckman was here too, the ghost hand of the red-haired pirates, his reputation for deadly precision unchallenged. On top of that stood Fleet Admiral Isho, better known as Fujitora, whose power was beyond question. At the Admiral's side was a woman who looked, at first glance, entirely ordinary, but anyone close enough to accompany Fujitora had to be formidable. Nethan was sure she hid considerable talent of her own. Beside Fujitora, Nami had gone completely still. Even she, no genius when it came to reading situations, knew something was very wrong. Admiral Aokiji, Hawkeye, Kuma, they all wore expressions that spoke of recognition and wariness. Aokiji's cold gaze in particular looked like that of an adversary sizing him up. Could they really know Nethan? A soft voice drifted from behind Nami. She spun around to see a broad-shouldered figure stepping forward. Jinbei, the third of the 7 warlords of the sea. His deep-set eyes glimmered with mild amusement as he took in Nami's bewildered expression, and then glanced at Nethan. "You don't know him?" Jinbei asked, his tone deceptively calm. At those words, Nethan froze. The warlords, the admirals, the world's strongest swordsmen, and even the pacifista were here by Fujitora's command, and they all seemed to know him. No, more than that, they were expecting him. And now Jinbei stood ready to fill in the pieces. Nethan drew in a sharp breath. It was going to be a very long day. Murloc Island was now firmly under Nethan's control, so Jinbei often found himself dealing with members of the Ghost Hand Pirates, and he'd even struck up a friendly rapport with Admiral Fujitora. That afternoon, as Jinbei exchanged pleasantries with Fujitora on the island's crowded dock, he noticed a young woman standing at the Admiral's side. She had bright orange hair and an expression of curious bewilderment. At first glance, Jinbei assumed she was one of the Ghost Hand Pirates, but something about her seemed off. Her name was Nami, and she looked as surprised by Jinbei's presence as he was by hers. "Do I know you?" she asked, brow furrowed. Jinbei forced a polite smile. "Of course you do. He's one of the 4 emperors. How could you not recognize him?" Nami blinked. "The 4 emperors?" Jinbei chuckled wryly. He just realized she was no pirate at all, but a civilian from the East Blue. Still, he indulged her ignorance. "The 4 emperors are the 4 most powerful pirate captains on the seas. They stand at the very top of the world's pirate hierarchy." Nami's eyes widened. "So they're incredibly strong?" Jinbei's gaze drifted to where Nethan stood nearby, overseeing a group of island guards. He lowered his voice. "If you're asking about that man, he's not just strong, he's the single most powerful pirate alive." Chapter 390, Rogue Town. Nethan stood in the damp dusk air of Rogue Town's harbor, facing Admiral Aokiji with steady eyes. Kuzan's expression was deceptively calm, but every muscle in his frame was coiled, ready to counter at the slightest provocation. He made no move to draw his weapon, yet the threat he posed was unmistakable. By Aokiji's side loomed 2 more legends of the sea, Bartholomew Kuma, the Tyrant Bear, and Dracul Mihawk, the unrivaled Hawkeye. Nethan knew that, without their support, attacking any one of them would be sheer madness. Kuma answered only to his own mysterious code, and Mihawk bowed to no master, not even the world government itself. Suppressing a flicker of unease, Nethan pivoted away from the Admiral and walked toward Bask, the Golden Lion's chief lieutenant. Kuzan's sharp gaze lingered on his back, but Nethan paid him no mind. He stopped a few paces from Bask and spoke with effortless nonchalance. "Since you're not grilling me, I suppose I'll just go find my own way to kill time." "Torture yourself for fun?" Bask repeated, brow arching. He'd expected Nethan to seek an alliance with the Golden Lion, perhaps to mount the long-dreamed coup against the world government. Yet Nethan's offhand tone and inscrutable smile suggested he had something else in mind entirely. A hush fell over the creaking docks. In a place built on danger and deception, Nethan's next move would set every rumor alight, and Rogue Town had never felt more alive. Aokiji hesitated at the edge of the clearing. He didn't know exactly what had transpired here, but he knew one thing for certain. Nethan's reputation as a combatant was fearsome. Better to watch than to strike, at least until he understood the full picture. Nethan strode forward, calm and unhurried, stopping just outside Bask's reach. The air around him crackled with barely contained power. Basque's lips curled into a predatory smile. "You're stronger than any of us imagined," he purred. "Join forces with the Golden Lion crew, and with your strength added to our plan, we could dominate these seas and reshape the world in our image." A flicker of surprise crossed Aokiji's face. Basque had clearly not expected Nethan to appear, and things were unraveling. If Nethan chose to get involved, he could crush them all, including Aokiji, without breaking a sweat. Yet Basque spoke as if they stood on equal footing. Nethan's gaze was cool, unreadable. "I have no intention of partnering with you," he said, his voice low and firm. It's not that I prefer to work alone, it's just that you're not worthy. In the past, such a declaration might have sounded like mere arrogance. Now, as one of the 4 emperors, having even bested Whitebeard and claimed the top rank among them, Nethin's refusal carried the weight of an emperor's fiat rather than a pirate's boast. Dominance spoke here, and Basque could only take a step back in dawning realization. "You," Basque snarled, shame and anger flashing in his eyes. Standing before him was Nethin, one of the enigmatic 4 emperors and the living embodiment of the Golden Lion Shiji's legend. Basque's bold words felt like an affront to everything Nethin represented. Before Basque could utter another challenge, Nethin's hand blurred. In a heartbeat, the sword Murasame materialized in his grip, its steel edge shimmering with an otherworldly light, as if it had slipped into a soul-like form. Then, with impossible speed, Nethin struck. Murasame drove straight through Basque's brow. Ice-blue eyes widened across the onlookers. Aokiji and the others stood rooted in place, helpless. When they finally reacted, they saw the sword's tip protruding from Basque's skull, but not a drop of blood fell. Instead, a strange, rippling force radiated outward from the wound, the power of Nethin's soul fruit technique, mind distortion. Nethin's voice was soft, almost curious, as he channeled that twisting energy through the blade and into Basque's mind. In an instant, Basque's limbs froze and his eyes rolled back, seized by the invasive surge of soul air. The chamber fell silent, no one dared move, all equally stunned by Nethin's terrifying mastery. Nethin let his devil fruit power wash over Basque, warping the pirate's emotions like a wicked mirror. Every flicker of defiance in Basque's heart was snuffed out. His fear, once faint, now surged to a blinding, panicked pitch. "Where is the Golden Lion?" Nethin's voice dropped into a low, distorted growl as he echoed Aokiji's earlier demand. Basque's face went ashen. I don't know," the pirate stammered, eyes darting about the dim interrogation cell. "All I know is, once we've taken this place, I'm to sail to Rogatown and report to the Golden Lion's boss." Nethin's brow furrowed. Of course Basque knew more than he admitted. After all, he was one of their top generals, locked up on the 6th level of Jinzen City Prison alongside some of the world's most notorious pirates. He couldn't possibly be clueless. Because Nethin had altered his voice with his devil fruit, Aokiji and the others standing guard outside heard nothing of the exchange. They only witnessed Nethin's silent motion, a single, swift plunge of steel at Basque's temple. And yet, impossibly, the pirate lived. He crumpled to the floor, blood trickling from a narrow scalp wound, eyes wide with fresh terror. "Rogatown?" he croaked, clutching at the edge of the bench to keep himself upright. "You're sure that's where he is? What's the Golden Lion doing there?" Nethin stepped back, the sword's tip still stained crimson. Doubt flickered in his gaze. Basque might well be lying to save his neck. But the pirate's insistence on Rogatown was too specific to ignore. Nethin folded his arms and leaned in, ready for the next question. Basque's voice shook. "This is where Roger was executed. The Golden Lion's boss will wipe it out completely, drag Roger's town down to the sea's bottom." Nethin's eyes glimmered with sudden understanding. He curled the fingers of his right hand around his sword's hilt, letting both soul power and distortion energy coalesce at the blade's edge. With a swift arc, he lifted the sword, and a geyser of blood plasma and white ichor splattered into the night sky. Basque's shoulders slumped, his head bowed, and he went still. Aokiji's deep voice cut through the shocked silence. "Hey, what have you done? He was the prisoner I brought in, and you just killed him." Nethin glanced over his shoulder, expression cool. "I learned everything I needed. He was worthless." He turned back to Aokiji, lips curling into a faint, indifferent smile. "So, are you going to avenge him?" Even as the words left his mouth lightly, a chill crept through the clearing, as if the very air had frozen around them. Commander Nethin advanced, and even Admiral Aokiji, renowned throughout the Navy for his icy resolve, found himself recoiling. Aokiji wasn't truly afraid of Nethin, but confronting him here, without knowing where the Tyrant Bear and Hawkeye stood, felt utterly pointless. A faint, confident smile tugged at Nethin's lips. When Aokiji fell silent, Nethin let his gaze flick toward the Tyrant Bear and Hawkeye, then turned and strode deliberately toward Fujitora. Nami stood rooted to the spot, stupefied by the display. Nethin hadn't needed to unleash any overt superhuman feats, yet Aokiji, the very emblem of justice, was visibly shaken. The tyrant bear and Hawkeye wore grim, unreadable expressions. Jinbei's quiet commentary at her side only drove the point home. In this gathering, Nethan was the undisputed force, more terrifying than any so-called monster they'd ever faced. A chill raced down Nami's spine. She glanced at Fujitora, standing calm and inscrutable, then at Jinbei, the formidable fishman warrior. And with a sudden pang of realization, she understood that she was the only ordinary soul amidst these titans. Chapter 391. Who is that person? Nethan caught the change in Nami's expression, relief mixed with gratitude, and couldn't help feeling useful. He strolled over to her and offered a casual smile. With Admiral Fujitora here, you don't have to worry about the village's safety anymore, and it might be best to stay ashore for a while. Who knows, maybe our paths will cross again. He waved lightly, then turned and approached Fujitora. The Admiral tapped the frozen earth with his cane. Cracks spidered outward, and the shattered ice rose into a broad stone platform beneath their feet. In a moment, Nithan and Fujitora were lifted into the sky. Below them, Hawkeye retracted his piercing gaze. He nodded curtly, slipped onto the back of Black Saber Ye, and flew off into the distance. The tyrant bear, ever silent, disappeared in the next instant, leaving only the faintest ripple in the air behind him. On the ground, Jinbei lingered. He stood a little apart, watching the village with quiet eyes. At last he stepped toward Nami, his voice soft with regret. Nami, I owe you an apology for Aaron's actions. I've known for some time that he seized power here, and as soon as I arrived, I understood the hardship he caused you and the other villagers. It was my responsibility to prevent this, but I failed. I'm truly sorry. Nami looked down, her shoulders tense. The wind ruffled her hair, carrying the distant sounds of the departing fleet. Jinbei waited patiently, letting her absorb his words. Whatever her reply, he knew he had to earn back their trust, starting with acknowledging his mistake. Above, the platform soared higher, carrying Nethan and Fujitora toward the horizon. Below them, the island found a fragile peace once more. And though Nethan could no longer see Nami's face, he sensed hope stirring in the air, a promise that someday they might indeed meet again. Nami pivoted stiffly and finally took the time to study Jinbei more closely. Seeing him bow apologetically, she hesitated. What was his connection to Aaron? Jinbei straightened and spoke in a deep, respectful tone. I am Jinbei, one of King Neptune's 3 warriors and the current lord of the Fishman district. Aaron's carelessness has caused you trouble, Lady Nami. Please accept my apologies. Nami's eyes widened. She'd already met an admiral, faced the world's greatest swordsman, and crossed paths with several of the 4 emperors, so another high-ranking title barely registered. Truth be told, she felt almost numb to such lofty designations. Kokoyashi village's shoreline. Nethan and Admiral Fujitora climbed back aboard their ship. Nethan had learned that the Golden Lion crew was headed next to Logatown, and he resolved they should beat them there. Set a course for Logatown, he said quietly to Fujitora. The Admiral merely snorted, as if this choice needed no explanation. He tapped his war fan against his cloak. Logatown, the town where Pirate King Roger was executed. It's where the great pirate era truly began. Nethan watched as the Golden Lion came to rest exactly where he intended. Ahead of him, the rift in the sea yawned open, and with a thought, he channeled his distortion power into the water. A massive surge rose up, slamming into the hull and sending his boat and everything aboard rocketing forward. Not far from Nethan's vessel, chaos had already exploded across the waves. A mutated sea beast had spotted Luffy's crew and crashed into their ship with brutal force. Though the creature wasn't a true fish and moved awkwardly in the water, its strength was terrifying. Luffy, Zoro, and the others fought back with everything they had, but the beast was relentless, pummeling their boat until it splintered beneath them. This thing just won't stay down, Sanji cursed, planting a steel-shod kick squarely on the beast's skull. He staggered back as pain lanced through his foot, like he'd kicked pure iron. With a deafening roar, the monster drove Luffy flying across the deck. Thanks to his rubber body, Luffy absorbed the impact, soared through the air, and snatched a bare, broken plank with both hands. His limbs stretched almost absurdly before snapping back into place. Damn, my wound, Luffy groaned, clutching his side through gritted teeth. The fight was far from over. and the sea was still raging. Sauron gripped his sword with white-knuckled intensity, cold sweat beading on his brow as blood welled from the slash Hawkeye's blade had reopened across his chest. The fresh cut ripped through skin that hadn't fully healed, yet he forced himself to stay on his feet. All around him, the Straw Hat crew fought tooth and nail against his monstrous strength. "Look, there's a boat!" Usopp's shout cut through the clash of steel and roars of pain. Every pair of eyes swung to the horizon, where a sleek skiff was plowing through the waves like a speeding yacht. It wasn't headed straight for them, but it was close enough that hope flickered in their hearts. Zoro winced as he pressed a trembling hand to his blood-soaked side. Gritting his teeth, he forced himself upright. "A boat won't save us now," he muttered, voice low with pain. "Let's finish this beast first." Sanji paused mid-drag on his cigarette, exhaling a plume of smoke before flicking the ash away. His blonde hair tousled in the salty breeze. He shot his mates a determined look. "Right." Luffy's eyes burned with that familiar spark of defiance. He let out a roar that drowned out even the crashing waves. Bending his knees, he drew back his right leg until every rubbery fiber in it was coiled tight. "Gomu Gomu! Tomahawk!" With a thunderous crack, Luffy's foot shot through the air and slammed into Sauron's skull. The impact sounded like a battering ram against stone. The beast howled in agony, staggered backward, then pitched headfirst into the sea. A towering wall of water swept over the deck, drenching the Straw Hats, but for a moment the battlefield fell silent. Their monstrous foe lay defeated beneath the waves, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, they dared to hope. A few seconds later, the mutated beast resurfaced, yet instead of lashing out at Luffy and the others, its eyes rolled back, and it bobbed limply on the waves, clearly knocked out by Luffy's crushing blow. "I'm saved." Sanji, Usopp, and the rest of the crew exhaled in relief. Had the fight dragged on any longer, none of them could have held out, and the ship certainly couldn't have withstood those brutal tosses. But just as they began to relax, their hearts sank. The unconscious creature was drifting right into the path of a small boat approaching from the distance. Usopp wiped cold sweat from his brow and trained his scope on the scene. From this vantage, it was obvious the boat and the dazed monster were bound to collide. If that tiny craft struck the beast's hulking form, the outcome would be catastrophic. Usopp's stomach twisted, but he tried to reassure himself. After all, a boat that size couldn't miss something so massive and unmistakable, could it? Under Usopp's vigilant eye, the small boat charged forward on the wind, skimming over waves. Then boom, its hull slammed into the mutant beast, pinning it to the ocean floor. Without pausing, the little vessel tore on into the distance, oblivious to the carnage it had caused. A few seconds later, the wounded creature bobbed back to the surface, dazed at first. Its enormous eyes cleared, renewed with feral rage, and it let out an earth-shaking roar as it fixed its gaze on Luffy and the others. Silence fell. Luffy said nothing. Sauron and Sanji exchanged grim, wordless looks. The rest of the crew held their breaths, hearts hammering in their chests. They'd managed to knock the monster senseless once, only to have it awakened again by that blasted ship. It felt like madness, like murder. Just as they steeled themselves for another desperate fight, the boat in the distance ground to a sudden halt, as if it had struck something, and everything changed in an instant. Nethin peered out from the cabin's small window and blinked in surprise. A crooked smile tugged at his lips. "Something's gone off course out Twoth. Here," he observed, shaking his head. "Looks like we'd better go help." On deck, Admiral Fujitora had also sensed the commotion. He rested one hand on his wooden cane, nodded gravely, and pushed open the hatch. Stepping into the bright sunlight, he took in the sight of Luffy and his crew, locked in yet another brutal skirmish. His blind eyes stirred with concern. Below him, Sanji and the others exchanged panicked glances. "A little trouble?" Sanji muttered, bile rising in his throat. That's the understatement of the century. They had no idea how or why a blind man was wandering the deck in the middle of open water. Surely it was reckless. Fujitora's calm voice drifted down to them. "Excuse me," he called politely. "Could you please step aside for a moment? I have a rather delicate task ahead." Luffy paused mid-swing, and the others hesitated, uncertain. Wake this sleeping giant now? But there was no choice. With a collective gasp, they slid aside, making a path for the Admiral, hoping they weren't about to regret it. Luffy and the others exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't know exactly what the blind admiral planned to do, but something in his bearing compelled them to step back, just in time. With a swift motion, Fujitora drew his cane sword and slashed the air before him. 10 kilo, gravity knife, he bellowed. Instantly, the sea around the monstrous creature buckled as if all its waters were being pulled downward. A concentrated sphere of gravity smashed into the beast, squeezing it with unimaginable force. In the blink of an eye, the creature's massive form collapsed into a storm of bone and flesh, shattered beyond recognition. Sanji, Usopp, Chopper, Nami, and even Luffy stood frozen, mouths agape. Never before had they witnessed such a display of raw power. Usopp's face went pale. He couldn't find a single word. Fujitora calmly sheathed his sword and offered them a small, reassuring smile. The sea's been dangerously unstable lately. I recommend you avoid it for your own safety. Without another word, he turned and walked into the cabin. Behind him, the ship's hull groaned as it surged forward through the restless waves. In moments, the vessel was nothing more than a silhouette against the churning ocean, speeding away until it vanished into the stormy sky. They watched until the boat slipped beyond the horizon. Only then did Sanji and the others come to their senses, a single question burning in each of their minds. Who was that man? Chapter 392. A Chance Encounter with Dashiki. The rain hung in the air like a low mist as Nithin and Admiral Fujitora stepped off the small boat and onto the docks of Roggy Town in the East Blue. They had departed Kokosia village several days earlier, but an early start on the road meant they'd arrived ahead of schedule. Nithin didn't mind. A slow morning over tea, perhaps even dinner if necessary, would give them time to gather their thoughts before the real work began. Now, seated across from each other at a corner table in a quiet tea house, Fujitora lifted a porcelain cup and inhaled its steam. Nithin, still in his travel-worn coat, unfolded a newspaper and studied the front page by the dim light filtering through rain-streaked windows. Outside, Marine patrols in crisp uniforms marched the wet streets, their presence more frequent and more tense than it had been just days ago. Fujitora set his cup down. "Do you sense it, Nithin?" he asked softly. Though blind, his keen awareness of the world around him was unrivaled. The Admiral tilted his head as the sound of distant marching feet grew louder. "There's something different in the air. The Marines are on high alert." Nithin glanced out at the patrols and folded the newspaper with a thoughtful frown. "None of this surprises me," he said. "Word is that the Golden Lion pirates have targeted Roggy Town next." He tapped the folded paper. "If the world government and the Navy know that, someone inside is passing them information. But why, how?" He shook his head. "We need to find out who's leaking to them before this place becomes a battlefield." Fujitora nodded, signaling for another round of tea. "Then we begin here," he said. "Quietly, carefully. Let's see who's watching and who's being watched." Outside, thunder rumbled in the distance, as though echoing the tension settling over Rogga Town. Inside the tea house, the two men shared a determined look. Their investigation had just begun. Fujitora's voice was steady, but carried an undercurrent of urgency. "If the government catches wind of this, they'll almost certainly send in heavy reinforcements to secure the area." Nithin smiled lightly. "Their true objective is to stop the Golden Lion. Even if they think I'm involved, they're not about to relocate the entire Navy headquarters to Rogga Town. Outside of people like Garp and Sengoku, no one, including Admirals Aokiji, Akainu, or Kizaru, poses a real threat to me." Fujitora took a measured sip of tea, his brow furrowed in thought. Just then, Nithin's peripheral vision caught a swift movement in the alley beyond the window. He paused. Someone else had arrived. Fujitora noticed the shift in Nithin's gaze and looked at him expectantly. Nithin deliberately withdrew his eyes from the fleeting silhouette and leaned back in his chair. "The Revolutionary Army's leader, Long," he said, his tone almost casual. Fujitora's expression tightened. "The revolutionaries are involved in this?" Nithin shook his head. "No, I get the sense he has entirely different motives." Fujitora fell silent, the lines around his eyes deepening as he pondered the implications. Nithin looked up to see a familiar figure enter the tea house, Dashiki. She moved directly to the counter, ordered a cup of tea, and then slid into an empty seat. Her eyes were shadowed with fatigue and a quiet melancholy, and she wore plain clothes instead of her crisp navy uniform. Compared to the last time he'd seen her, she looked like a different person. Nethan clicked his tongue in sympathy as he watched her settle. A moment later, the waiter placed a steaming cup of tea before her. Dasiki murmured her thanks, raised the cup, and took a careful sip. Almost immediately, Nethan's words from their last conversation buzzed through her mind. Seen with fresh eyes, the Navy's brand of justice no longer felt like an unquestionable duty, but something she had to reevaluate, and that realization had shaken her to her core. In the days since, her distraction had grown so severe that she'd knocked over more cups than she cared to admit. Officer Smoker, fed up with her mistakes, had briefly suspended her, ordering her to rest until she could regain her focus. Dasichi let out a soft sigh. She longed to chase away those persistent thoughts and return to her former confidence, but they clung to her mind stubbornly. She set her tea down again and stared into the swirling steam, lost in her own restless reflections. Dasiki froze the moment she glanced into the corner of the room and caught sight of Nethan seated beside Admiral Fujitora. Facing him head-on, she was struck by his expression, calm, almost amused. He noticed her stare, lifted his teacup, and called out in that same easy tone, "Care for a cup of tea?" Her heart hammered so violently that for an instant she could only stare. Shock faded, and she pressed her lips into a thin line, fighting the instinct to draw her sword. In any other circumstance, she would have reacted instantly. Now, disoriented and unable to stop herself, she found her feet carrying her forward. As she drew closer, her gaze fell on the blindfolded admiral beside Nethan. Fujitora. The memory of his ruthlessness under the ghost hand banner sent a chill down her spine. She halted 2 paces away and forced herself to speak, her voice low and controlled. "What are you doing here?" Nethan set his cup on the table, took a slow sip of the steaming tea, and let the silence stretch. Then he leaned back, eyes never leaving hers. "This territory falls under my domain, my freedom, but if you must know, I'm here to settle an old debt with the Golden Lion." "The Golden Lion?" Dasiki's voice cracked as she took an involuntary step backward. Only a few months ago she would never have made the connection. Now, the mention of that legendary pirate, Shiki, the Golden Lion who vanished 20 years ago, sent her mind racing with questions and a sudden, unbidden dread. Over the past few weeks, the Golden Lion's rampage had thrown the entire East China Sea into chaos. Rumors of his brutality were everywhere, so Sergeant Dasiki was naturally on high alert. Nethan, however, seemed completely unfazed. "That scoundrel nearly killed me," he said with a detached shrug, "and look at the havoc he's wreaked across these waters. He deserves to rot in hell." Dasiki stared at him, momentarily speechless. If Nethan had been a naval admiral, his words might have sounded routine, but he was a pirate lord, one of the most feared figures on the ocean. Unsure how to respond, she bit her lip and forced out a sarcastic question. "But haven't you done just as many terrible things as the Golden Lion?" Nethan's dark eyes flicked up to meet hers, his face expressionless. "Don't be absurd. I've committed heinous acts, no doubt, so enlighten me, Sergeant. Which of my crimes are you referring to?" Dasiki hesitated. She devoured every dispatch about Nethan, articles that branded him one of the legendary 4 Emperors, the world's most vicious pirate captains. Yet none of those reports had ever explained exactly what he'd done. They only hinted at an unspoken evil. Now, as Nethan's contemptuous gaze bored into her, she found herself without an answer. Dasiki ground her teeth, searching for a retort, but no words came. "Fine." Nethan set his teacup down, drained the last drop of tea, and rose from his seat. "I'm done here," he said. "Any questions before I go?" Her expression wavered. She opened her mouth, then thought better of it as he crossed the room. When he paused at the tea-house door, she finally forced the words out. "What is justice?" Nethan chuckled softly, a glint of amusement in his eyes. "That's a troublesome question," he admitted. "No one can truly answer it. Everyone's got their own version." Dasichi leaned forward. "And yours?" He offered her a shrug over his shoulder. "I don't have one." She stared, incredulous. He simply opened the door wider and slipped out into the street. As the wooden latch fell into place behind him, his parting words drifted back through the doorway. "Why should I bother with justice?" Chapter 393. The melee begins Rogue Town. The Straw Hat crew had just landed, and the streets were already teeming with Navy patrols. Sauron, on his way to buy a new knife, kept slipping into narrow alleys whenever a squad of soldiers came into view. Civilians were practically non-existent. All he saw were armed officers marching in tight formations. This town's security was far tighter than he'd expected. Sauron prided himself on being fearless, but he wasn't foolish. He knew that drawing the Navy's attention here would mean big trouble, not just for him, but for Luffy and the rest of the crew. Still, he couldn't leave without that blade. Summoning his resolve, he stepped back onto the main road and scanned the shop fronts for the weapons store. Just then, two figures crossed his path, a man and a woman, each with a sword sheathed at their waist. Sauron halted mid-stride, every muscle on edge. Behind him, Dashi Chi, who had been trailing Nethin, also spotted Sauron. Her eyes flicked to the faint inscription on his belt, Hedao. The name of the pirate hunter was unmistakable, and she let out a surprised gasp. Nethin's gloom lifted the instant he saw the famed blade. Could it really be Hidaoi's masterpiece from the Grand Swift Sword 21 Guild? Dasichi pushed his glasses up the bridge of his nose, then couldn't resist stepping closer to Sauron, eager to inspect the sword himself. Startled, Sauron took 2 quick steps back, voice taut with warning. "Hey, what are you doing?" Dasichi froze mid-stride, then stammered out a hasty apology, bowing so earnestly he wished he could vanish into the floor. Finally, Sauron's expression softened. "Forget it. You seem to know your blades. Go ahead and examine it." Relieved, Dasichi asked, "Mind if I actually hold it?" With a gesture, Sauron passed him Hidaoi's legendary sword. As Dasichi turned it over in his hands, Sauron glanced at the sword hanging from Dasichi's waist. He frowned thoughtfully. "You carry a good blade too, don't you?" Dasichi smiled and drew his sword from its sheath. "This is Shigure, 50 forges, 1 rank below Hidaoi's work, but a solid piece nonetheless." He handed it to Sauron, who received it with genuine curiosity. Dasichi carefully unwrapped the cloth around the blade and held it out to Sauron. He examined it closely, eyes widening with recognition. "This is the genuine Hidao," he said, a note of admiration in his voice. "Absolutely remarkable." Dasichi smiled, a little surprised by his sudden praise, but pleased that her knowledge of swords had earned her a place in the conversation. Sauron, having inspected the blade, handed it back and cleared his throat. "By the way," he said, "is there a shop nearby that sells knives?" "There's one just a short walk from here," Dasichi replied, gesturing down the road. "I'll show you." "Thank you," Sauron said, bowing his head in gratitude. "No problem," Dasichi said, then noticed Nethin standing quietly beside her. He showed no impatience, only a calm, watchful curiosity as he looked at Sauron. With a nod, she beckoned them both to follow. The 3 of them set off down the village street toward the knife shop. Along the way, Sauron's gaze kept drifting to the sheath at Nethin's hip. Though the knife's craftsmanship was unmistakable, something about it felt different from a swordsman's blade. Stopping in his tracks, Sauron turned to Dasichi and nodded toward Nethin. "He's not a swordsman, is he?" Dasichi glanced at Nethin, who shrugged lightly. "No, he isn't." Nethin returned Sauron's look with a half-smile. "I'm not a swordsman," he said simply, and they continued on their way. Nethin's quiet admission made Sauron shake his head with a wry smile. A renowned blade like that in the hands of someone who'd never trained as a swordsman, he felt a pang of regret. But try as he might, he couldn't pry the famed knife from Nethin's grip. Before long, the 3 of them reached the old bladesmith's shop at the edge of Ragi. Dashiki was just about to open the heavy oak door for Sauron when Nethin, his hand shot out. He gripped Dashiki's collar and yanked her backward. The moment she stumbled, a thunderous crash rent the air. A massive creature had hurled itself through the smithy's roof. Wood splintered, sparks flew, and the shop collapsed in ruin. Its eyes glowed crimson, its claws raked the earth, and a furious roar shook the street. The beast's gaze locked on the trio. "It's begun," Nethin said, his voice unnervingly calm. Sauron didn't hesitate. Drawing his greatsword in a single fluid motion, he sprinted forward. "Hold it off!" he shouted over the monster's bellow. "Nethin, Dashiki, go find the golden lion. I'll keep it busy." Without waiting, Nethin gave Dashiki a hard nod. Together they darted down a narrow alleyway, the roar of the beast and Sauron's defiant war cry receding behind them. Nethan had faced this creature before and knew exactly how deadly it could be. Even now, with his wounds fully healed, he'd struggle to bring one down, and he still had 2 flasks of oil strapped to his belt. He opened his mouth to warn the others, but before a single word came out, a chorus of roars split the air. 4 of the monsters hurtled from the sky, smashing into the street in rapid succession. Their immense bulk tore through half a dozen buildings like they were made of paper. Debris rained down, dust choked the air, and for a heartbeat, the town was frozen in stunned silence. Desiki stared at the rampaging beasts, her pupils shrinking to pinpricks. She'd encountered these monsters at sea before, had watched stragglers tear through entire patrols, and she'd never been able to best one. It was Smoker who'd finally dispatched them with a single shot. Now seeing 4 towering beasts bellowing in unison, her hands trembled so badly she could barely grip her sword, Shigure. She felt utterly exposed. Nethan's jaw clenched. If there'd been only one of these things, they might have stood a chance, even in his weakened state. But so many. He risked lighting those oil flasks just by thinking about it. With another thunderous roar, the monsters advanced. There was no time to debate. Nethan yanked Desiki back and pivoted on his heel. "Fall back," he shouted. Boom, boom. The ground shook under their retreat as the beasts crashed through the streets, each step heralded by splintering wood and collapsing stone. As the dust clouded their escape route, Nethan glanced over his shoulder. He'd never run from a fight before. But today, survival was the only battle he could win. The ruins trembled under the monster's onslaught, walls fracturing and stone dust filling the air. A hulking beast let out a guttural roar and with one brutal swipe sent Sauron hurtling through the wreckage. Before he could recover, it whipped its massive arm around and charged straight at Nethan Desiki. This was bad. Nethan's heart hammered as he watched Sauron crash into a shattered pillar, but he didn't hesitate. He lifted his chin, locked eyes with the snarling creature, and unleashed a cold, imperious glare. It was as though the air itself turned to iron. Mid-attack, the monster froze. Its roar died in its throat, its claws trembled, and it staggered backward, fighting to stay upright. Sauron scrambled to his feet, breath coming in ragged gasps. What had stopped that thing? He had no idea, but he wasn't about to argue with good fortune. A thunderous crash echoed as yet another beam collapsed, and through the dust, Sauron spotted a familiar fight just beyond the fallen walls. Luffy and his crew grappling with a similarly enormous fiend. "Luffy!" Sauron bellowed, waving frantically. Luffy, Zoro, and Sanji paused mid-strike and turned toward him. Zoro's hand dropped to his sword's hilt. Sanji's jaw set in a hard line. "There are too many monsters," Sanji called out, voice tight with urgency. "We can't handle them all. We have to fall back now." Although Luffy was nothing if not stubborn, even he knew he couldn't take on this many monsters by himself. He traded blows, was forced back, and then fell back toward Zoro, Sanji, and the others. Just then, scores of Marines poured into the streets, engaging the creatures in fierce combat. Some bare-handed soldiers grappled directly with the colossal ape beast, wrestling its massive arms. Others brandished swords, their blades flashing as they cleaved a bell tower clean in two. Luffy and his friends stared in stunned silence. "What's going on with the Navy?" Usopp blurted out, his voice trembling. "It's one thing for a whole squad to handle a single monster, but these guys are taking them down solo. Their strength is unreal." Nami's eyes narrowed. "They're not just any Marines," she said quietly. Dashiki, who'd once been suspended but still kept close tabs on naval operations, added in a low voice, "These are elite officers straight from headquarters. Colonels and even major generals have been dispatched to defend Rogatown." The realization sank in. This battle was far bigger than the Straw Hats had anticipated. Chapter 394. Who am I? Where am I? Headquarters? Navy headquarters? A cold sweat trickled down Sanji's face as he stared at their surroundings. Navy headquarters, he muttered in disbelief. They'd only just defeated Admiral Creek, and already the Marines had slapped a 20 million berry bounty on Luffy's head. Every one of them knew they shouldn't be loitering here. Usopp's voice trembled as he spoke up. "Maybe we should." "No," Sanji cut him off, glaring at the group. "Nami isn't with us. She's still back in the town. We can't just run away." Luffy inhaled deeply, his expression turning serious at once. "Sanji's right. Sauron, Sanji, Usopp, we're going back for Nami. He nodded toward the small settlement outside, already overrun by marines and the monstrous beasts they'd unleashed. Let's move. At that moment, a deep roar shook the air. A hulking creature burst through the ruined gates of the town, snarling as it charged. Luffy cracked his knuckles. Zoro drew both swords in one motion. Sanji sprang into the sky. In a heartbeat, the three of them lunged forward, determined to carve a path through the enemy and reach Nami. But before their combined assault could land, a thunderous shockwave slammed into them from the side. A deep, rumbling voice echoed over the chaos. Murloc Karate, 3,000 Wajang fists. Boom! A deep, muffled roar rumbled through the air, and then with a single, bone-shaking punch, half of the monster, stubbornly undefeated even by Luffy's full power, exploded in a shower of gore, leaving a massive crater through its flesh. As the dust settled, a broad-shouldered figure stepped forward. Hai Xia Jingping, one of the king's famed 7 martial lords. Shock froze everyone in their tracks. To face such a hulking beast alone, and to obliterate it with one blow, marked him as something more than human. Usopp stumbled backwards, eyes wide. Who is that guy? He's Hai Xia Jinping, Nami replied, voice trembling, one of the Chi Wuhai in the king's service. Tashigi, still cradling Shiyu, felt her chest tighten at the brutal display. Blood spattered the ground, but she gritted her teeth and fought to stay calm. A warlord. Zoro exchanged a look with Sanji. They both remembered Johnny's warning about the 3 great powers that ruled the Grand Line. Hai Xia Jinping was clearly on par with Dracula. Hawkeye, Mihawk, his strength was unreal. Usopp's forehead glistened with cold sweat. Even one of the Chi Wuhai shows up now. What's going on here? Sanji watched Jinbei press the attack on the last of the creatures, an uneasy chill creeping down his spine. I swear, I've never felt more like we're walking into some dreadful trap, he muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. Dasiki took a steadying breath, her thoughts snapping back to Nethan's earlier warning about the Golden Lion. Could he really be headed for this very spot? She glanced over at Nethan, piecing it together. This must be why the Navy had posted heavy guards, and why Nethan himself had come here. The Golden Lion's target. She shook off her momentary haze. We need to find Nami. Now is not the time to freeze up. At that instant, Zoro's calm voice cut through the clamor. He looked from Luffy and Usopp over at Nethan and Dasiki. There's no safe corner in this place, he said grimly. We need to move, right now. Dasiki's heart skipped a beat. The Straw Hats didn't know Nethan at all. How could that be? She stole a quick glance at him, confusion warring with urgency in her chest. Luffy! Dasichi realized Nami was still missing. Before she could say more, Luffy was already sprinting across the rubble, calling out her name at the top of his lungs. A faint reply echoed back from a partly collapsed ruin not far away. I'm here! Nami's voice carried hope amid the ruins, proof they still had a chance to regroup. As Jinbei's deep bellow signaled another wave of monsters crashing down, the group braced themselves. Nethan and Dasiki fell into step beside the Straw Hats. Whatever lay ahead, they'd face it together, especially if the Golden Lion was lurking just around the corner. Chapter X, Salvation Among the Ruins. I'm here! Nami burst out from behind the shattered columns. The moment she spotted Luffy and the others in the distance, her whole face lit up. She leapt forward, weaving through the rubble, only to halt in terror as a hulking creature lunged from the shadows. Watch out, Nami, Luffy shouted. Zoro and the rest sprang into action, racing toward her, but the beast was almost upon her before they could close the gap. Then, from deeper in the ruins, a steady tapping rang out. Tuck, tuck, tuck. A solitary figure emerged, leaning on a simple wooden staff, dust cloak, and when he lifted his head, his eyes were nothing but milky white orbs, no pupils in sight. It was Admiral Fujitora. Silently, he raised his staff. Hum! In an instant, a catastrophic force of gravity slammed into the creature. It collapsed under its own weight, pinned so brutally that cracks spider-webbed across the ground. Luffy and Zoro skidded to a halt, mouths agape. That's the Admiral, Zoro breathed, recalling the calm giant they'd met aboard that drifting skiff days ago. Relief washed over them all. Luffy dashed forward, a grateful grin on his face. Thank you, Admiral Fujitora. Nami joined him, her voice trembling with thanks. Above them, Fujitora stood unmoved, staff in hand, silently surveying the subdued monster as dust settled around his feet. As Fujitora's weighted crutches came crashing down, the sea monster froze in its tracks. Nami's legs shook as she turned to him, gratitude flooding her voice. Thank you, Admiral Fujitora. She remembered the rumors she'd heard. This blind swordsman before her was no ordinary marine. He was a pirate lord with a bounty surpassing 1 billion berries. Fujitora offered her a gentle nod. With the threat gone, Luffy and the others finally let out long-held breaths. Usopp wiped the cold sweat from his brow. Whoa, that guy's ridiculously strong. Who is he anyway? Dasiki tilted her head, studying Fujitora's silent form. He's the commander of the 1st Division of the Phantom Hand Pirates, she explained, a knowing smile flickering across her lips. His bounty's 1.2 billion berries. As she spoke, she caught sight of Nethan standing off to the side. He wasn't watching Fujitora or the subdued beast. His eyes were fixed on something to the east, as though an unseen magnet held his attention. Pirates. 1.2 billion berries, Luffy muttered, his fist clenching. Zoro's jaw tightened beside him. Even seasoned fighters like them felt their hearts pound. After all, the highest bounty they'd ever seen in these waters was Admiral Crick at 17 million. And now, here stood a pirate with a price tag nearly 100 times greater. Nethan had just finished off Crick and earned a 20 million Bailey bounty for his trouble. Yet the next target before him carried a staggering 1.2 billion Bailey reward, 10 times his own. 1.2 billion Baileys? How is that even possible? Usopp blurted, his face a mask of disbelief. Dashiki was about to reassure him when a sudden crackling split the air. From down the ruined street, jagged blocks of ice began to sprout and spread, freezing everything in their path. Then came a tremendous crash. A figure was hurled skyward, smashing through crumbling walls. He landed in a spray of ice shards before them. No sooner had the shards settled than they whirled together, merging into the shape of a young man. Without lifting his head, he glanced toward the street's end. His shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "Ah, Lala," he murmured, voice heavy with surprise. "I really didn't expect to find you here." Dashiki's eyes went wide at the sight of Chinji, but when she remembered Nethan beside her and the Golden Lion's looming threat, her shock hardened into steely determination. Luffy, Zoro, and the others stared in disbelief as the boy before them shattered into 1,000 ice shards, then reassembled himself in the blink of an eye, freezing the entire street solid. Their hearts pounded. Could someone this young really possess such overwhelming power? Tashigi drew a steadying breath. General Chinji's devil fruit gives him natural Logia ice powers, she explained. Smoker, my direct superior, is a Logia user too. His is smoke, but ice and smoke don't even compare. Smoker isn't in the same league as Chinji. General? You mean Admiral? Sanji's eyes went wide. He's an admiral in the Navy? Nethan nodded casually. Admiral of the Navy headquarters. At the word admiral, Sanji and the others exchanged awed glances. Even without intimate knowledge of naval ranks, they knew admirals stood at the very top. And here one was, right in front of them. Nethan, however, paid their astonishment no mind. His gaze was fixed on the frozen street. From the ice stepped a man draped in a dark green cloak. He paused, surprise flickering across his features as he took in the gathered crew. Nethan had only meant to stop by Logatown long enough to see Luffy before he set sail on the Grand Line. He never expected the sleepy port to have transformed overnight into a fortress. Naval battalions lined the streets, barricades blocked the docks, and the air crackled with the tension of an impending clash. It wasn't long before the first shots rang out. Battle erupted in the town square, and any hope of slipping through unnoticed vanished. A young Marine, eager to make a name for himself, spotted Nethan and charged. Reluctantly, Nethan defended himself, and the skirmish was over almost as soon as it began. The would-be attacker lay unconscious, and Nethan stood alone amid the chaos. Commander Long surveyed the scene with calm detachment. "So this is where the Golden Lion plans to strike," he observed, voice steady. "No wonder they've thrown so many troops at him." Captain Chingzi, by contrast, moved with composed precision. She'd been briefed only on one high-value target, the Golden Lion himself. But the sudden appearance of another legendary pirate, known throughout the world government's files as the Dragon, had caught her off guard. Whoever the Dragon was, he wasn't someone they could simply let walk away. Chingji's eyes gleamed. In a heartbeat, she launched herself forward. With one deliberate motion, she thrust her hand skyward. Above the rooftops, a massive sphere of shimmering ice formed in midair. Then, with a thunderous crash, it plummeted toward Nethin, a frozen cannonball unleashed by the world government's finest. The dragon saw it coming too late. The impact shattered cobblestones, sent splinters of ice raining down, and left no doubt. In Logatown today, the Navy had just unleashed its deadliest weapon. And Nethin, branded the dragon, would be its ultimate test. The tremendous impact drew gasps from the entire crowd. Luffy, Zoro, and the others all wore expressions of stunned disbelief. Shinji's ice sphere thundered toward Long, but the dragon simply snorted in contempt. With no hint of hesitation, he coiled his massive arm and unleashed a single, earth-shaking punch. Boom! The fist collided with the glacial orb and shattered it instantly. Tens of meters of solid ice exploded into countless glittering fragments, scattering like diamonds in the air. For a long moment, everyone stood frozen, watching the shards drift to the ground. It was then that Nethin, who had been caught in the shockwave, felt a strange emptiness wash over him. As the dragon flexed his fist and the dust settled, Nethin's mind went blank. Who am I? Where am I? What am I doing here? His heart pounded as he realized with dawning horror that he could not answer any of those questions. Chapter 395. Charge! Charge! The war cry tore through the air like a thunderclap. Nethin's pulse hammered in his ears as he watched a lone warrior break formation and surge toward Shinji. Dasiki's face turned ashen. He stumbled back, eyes wide in disbelief. That can't be, Dasichi whispered hoarsely. Dragon, Sanji breathed beside Nethin. The man racing forward stood alone against half a dozen guards, black hair whipping around a face set in resolute intensity. Dragon, the infamous leader of the Revolutionary Army, public enemy number 1 of the world government. More feared than even the 4 emperors, his very name had been splashed across every East Blue newspaper for daring uprisings, pirate fleet raids, and the recent overthrow of an entire monarchy on faraway island. The revolution's grown stronger than anyone imagined, Dasiki said, voice trembling. Their ideals threaten the status quo, more than any pirate lord ever could. Nethin's gaze flicked from Dasiki to Sanji, then back to the courtyard where Dragon clashed with Shinji's radiant staff. Each blow sent shockwaves rippling through the assembled soldiers, and the air crackled with unleashed power. There's no time to gawk, Nethin muttered, grabbing Sanji's sleeve. We need to slip away before both sides notice us. Reluctantly, Dasiki nodded, and the three slipped into the shadows. As they retreated, the thunder of Dragon's defiant war cry trailed behind them, a stark reminder that the world they knew was on the brink of upheaval and that their lives would never be the same again. Usopp's voice was barely more than a whisper as he staggered back, his legs and feet trembling under him. His warning jolted Sauron and the others awake. Luffy was already rallying the crew. Everyone, fall back! Now! Sauron's hand shot out as he was about to call for Nethin and Dashiki to retreat alongside them when a sudden, mocking laughter boomed from above. Ha 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 ha! Well, what do we have here? An admiral, a Shichibukai, the Navy, and world government, all gathered just for little old me. From the darkened sky descended a striking figure clad in shimmering gold armor, the Golden Lion. He hovered there, arms folded, looking down over the town of Ragi with a disdainful grin. Directly behind him drifted a massive Revolutionary Army ship, its deck teeming with black-clad soldiers whose fierce expressions spoke of battle readiness. On the ground, Shinji, who had been locked in combat with a snarling draconic beast, abruptly broke off their clash. He skidded backward, planting himself firmly, eyes hard and lips curled in contempt as he glared skyward at the Golden Lion. What had begun as a straightforward operation to capture the Golden Lion had exploded into chaos the moment the Revolutionary Army's commander, Long, made his grand entrance. Now, every plan hung by a thread. The world government ranked the dragon higher than the Golden Lion in terms of threat level, yet this mission wasn't about the dragon. It was all about taking down the Golden Lion. That single focus made the stakes impossibly high. High above the deck, the Golden Lion hovered in midair, a thick cigar clamped between his teeth as smoke curled around his grizzled mane. He peered down at the man below and rumbled in recognition. "Nethin," he said, voice deep and gravelly. "It's been 20 years, and look at you now. An admiral?" Nethan stood his ground, every inch the formidable Navy headquarters admiral he'd worked so hard to become. 2 decades ago, he'd been nothing more than Vice Admiral Garp's protege, an eager junior who could only watch in awe as Garp and this very Golden Lion clashed time and again. Back then, the Golden Lion had seemed unstoppable. Today, he looked little more than a wounded old beast. Their eyes locked. The wind whipped at Nethan's coat as he answered coolly, "Time changes us all. Don't underestimate me." Above them, the world held its breath, until, in that charged silence, a new development shattered the moment. A woman stepped forward, her navy blue justice cloak edged in pink cuffs, and in her hand she carried a sword that shimmered with cold light. She lifted her gaze to the sky above and announced, "The dragon is yours to chase down. I'll handle the Golden Lion." This was Alternate General Momotu of Navy Headquarters. Across the field stood Admiral Chingji. Despite being badly outnumbered, he refused to let the dragon escape. They needed at least to pin it in place. As for whether Momotu could actually subdue the Golden Lion, Chingji didn't question it. Her power now rivaled his own. If she couldn't bring the beast to heel, then no one could. Besides, he found it hard to believe that a creature who'd lost a leg and vanished for 20 years still possessed the unstoppable might it once wielded. High above them, the Golden Lion glared down at Momotu, whom he contemptuously called the little peach rabbit. He sneered, "You think you can take me on? What are you going to do? Pinch me to death with those dainty wrists?" He remembered Chingji from old battles, but Momotu was an unknown quantity. Even in her youth, she'd been ranked below the admiral. Now, however, it looked as if she might prove him very, very wrong. "What kind of impression do major generals and brigadier generals leave?" the Golden Lion taunted, his voice dripping with condescension. For a moment, Motu's eyes flashed with anger. Her slender brows arched sharply, but almost as quickly she composed herself. In one fluid motion, she lifted her sword and slashed toward him. A single triumphant laugh rang out as a wave of golden sword energy tore across the sky, cleaving through the darkness like molten light. The brilliance of her strike drew every gaze. Even Sauron's face went pale. That woman's power, this level of technique, was far beyond anything he could muster right now, and she was a woman, to boot. Dasichi watched Motu in awe. As a fellow swordswoman, she had long admired Motu's skill. Rumor held that Lieutenant General Motu was the closest protege to the high command and a shoo-in for full general next. What a force to behold. Sanji and the others exchanged stunned looks. Their scalps tingled, their hearts pounding. This new adversary was no ordinary soldier, but something altogether more formidable. The Golden Lion barely registered Nethan at first, but the instant Nethan's blade flashed, the beast's smug expression vanished. Letting out a low roar, it lashed out its right hind leg. Chop! Hum! A surge of golden sword ki met Nethan's slash head-on, and the sky itself seemed to shake with the thunderous impact. When the dust finally cleared, the lion's eyes still burned with arrogance, though its contemptuous sneer had been replaced by grudging respect. This man is powerful. With those thoughts, Nethan sprang onto the moonlit stairway and launched himself straight at the Golden Lion. His face was ice-cold, his sword a gleaming promise of death. The lion snarled in reply and met him in midair, claws and blade colliding in a furious dance. In the blink of an eye, they traded dozens of blows, each clash sending ripples of energy shuddering through the night. Ding, ding, dong! A frigid light sparked in Nethan's eyes. Drawing on every ounce of his willpower, he poured his dominant force into one final strike. The edge of his sword flared with overwhelming intensity, and the Golden Lion reared back, unable to withstand the onslaught. With a roar, it tumbled backwards, skidding more than 10 meters through the air before crashing to a halt. Breathing heavily, Nethan hovered in the stillness above the ruined courtyard. Even in his prime, such an exchange would have left scars. At his age, he told himself, it was wiser to withdraw and find a safe haven to rest and recover. With that, he sheathed his sword and drifted silently away under the pale moonlight. The Golden Lion staggered back from a single blow, but Momotu merely narrowed his eyes. His blade flashed, and he pressed the attack without hesitation. After all, the Golden Lion, his legs shattered and lost to time for 20 years, stood little chance against Momotu's mastery of the sword. Back when I was crossing the Grand Line, You were nowhere to be found, scurrying around like a child with a runny nose. Momotu sneered, steel ringing against steel as they clashed again and again. Despite his injuries, the golden lion relied on the fluid movements granted by the piao-piao fruit to keep his footing. Nearby, the peach rabbit, able to bound across the moonlit sky, tried to match that agility, but even her lunar leaps couldn't rival the lion's drifting grace. Their duel raged on in a perfect balance of speed and skill, neither combatant yielding an inch. On a distant ridge, Luffy and his crew readied themselves to fall back, only to be halted in their tracks. From the sky, hundreds of black-cloaked pirates dove toward the island in a coordinated descent. At their head strode fierce lieutenants who exuded menace with every step. Landing in tight formation, the pirate horde turned their cold, grinning faces on the marine ranks below. "Crush the navy," their captains bellowed. "Leave no one standing." The island trembled as the vicious order echoed, and the marines braced themselves for the onslaught. The roar of countless pirates rose like thunder, and in an instant they surged toward the island's naval defenders. At the very same moment, a Navy lieutenant general at headquarters slammed his sword against his shield and bellowed, "They're upon us! 2nd, 3rd, and 4th Divisions, forward!" A deafening cheer answered him as nearly 1,000 sailors snapped into formation. In the heartbeat that followed, pirates and marines locked eyes, raised their weapons, and charged. War cries clashed as steel met steel in a tumult of dust and fury. Luffy gaped in disbelief. Sauron stood frozen, mouth agape. Sanji's composure shattered at the sight before him. Nethin's heart pounded so fiercely he was sure the others could hear it. They all realized, at the same instant, that they were standing dead center between two colliding armies. "Ah! It's over! We're done for!" Usopp wailed, tears and snot streaming down his cheeks. He frantically looked for an escape, but there was none. To his left, the Navy's battle line. To his right, the pirates' onrush. Trapped in a living pincer, the 5 of them braced for the impact. Chapter 396, The Straw Hat's Shock. The morning sky above the harbor roared with cannon fire and clashing steel as the Navy and the Golden Lion's pirate crew launched their decisive assault. Everyone's eyes were drawn upward to the aerial duel between the legendary Golden Lion and the notorious Peach Rabbit, who danced through the clouds like dueling gods. On the deck below, Nethin stood perfectly still, his gaze flicking from the fierce contest overhead to the ground forces surging on either flank. To his left, Navy Marines poured forward in disciplined ranks. To his right, Golden Lion pirates charged with feral abandon. He frowned, surprised. Had his presence really gone unnoticed? He hadn't cloaked his aura this time, hadn't slipped into the shadows. He was right here in full view of friend and foe alike. That moment of shock wasn't lost on Nami. As she darted through the fray, her heart leapt when she spotted him. Nethin, standing calm and silent at the edge of the melee. Her breath caught. He's here, and alive. The memory of what they'd endured only days before still haunted her, and seeing him now sent a fresh jolt of fear and relief racing through her. "Enough of this charade," Nethin's voice rang out, cold and commanding. He stepped forward, each footfall carrying the weight of unspoken resolve, striding straight toward the Golden Lion's colors. Bound by the immense aura of both Navy and pirate, Sauron, pinned and trembling, felt his limbs seize. He ground his teeth, lips parting to spit out a curse, but when his eyes met Nethin's advancing form, he froze in stunned disbelief. "You?" In that instant, every blade paused, every cannon's breath held. The battlefield fell silent as the true scale of Nethin's arrival dawned on all. Nethin stepped forward alone, unfazed by the chaos of marines and pirates swarming around him. Luffy, Sanji, Zoro, and the others turned in unison, eyes locked on this newcomer. They'd noticed Nethin and Dashiki earlier, but one shock had barely settled before another erupted, and none had found a moment to question Sauron about their identities. Sanji angled toward Zoro. "Who is that guy?" Zoro shrugged, about to admit he didn't recognize him when something extraordinary happened. Without warning, Nethin rose into the air, as if gravity itself had forgotten his name. He climbed higher and higher in a single graceful surge. "Flying!" Luffy gasped, his eyes going wide with awe. A flicker of excitement danced in his gaze. Across the battlefield, several vice admirals, the ones spearheading the marine assault, halted their forward charge. They stared up at Nethan, sweat beading on their brows, faces drained of color. Horror filled their eyes. "That's the ghost hand of the four emperors," one stammered. Why is he here?" Around them, even the high-ranking officers trembled. Some glanced at each other in panic. Others covered their mouths, unable to believe the impossible. In that moment, the arrival of the four emperors' phantom enforcer changed everything. A cold silence fell over them as the memory of Nethan's assault on the naval headquarters fortress replayed in everyone's mind. Even the feared ghost hand paused in shock. Qingji, Taotu, Long, and the figure known as the Golden Lion, each of them spun around to face him, expressions frozen in disbelief. On one level, Nethan's appearance here wasn't a total surprise. He'd undoubtedly intercepted the Golden Lion's next assault orders from Basque and used that intelligence to coordinate with the naval forces. Taotu had been one of his key pieces all along. What none of them expected was Leader Long's sudden intervention. Long's arrival had turned their carefully laid plans upside down. Even grappling with the Golden Lion and the Dragon together pushed the Navy to its limits. Adding Nethan into the fray was sheer recklessness. Now, high above the decks, Nethan hovered with unshakable calm. He swept his gaze across Taotu and the Golden Lion before speaking in a quiet, unwavering tone. "I'll claim the Golden Lion's head, myself. You and your fleet, stand down." Nethan stood at the bow, the salt spray whipping through his dark hair. For a heartbeat, the ocean was utterly still, and then it rippled with power. A crushing aura, the unmistakable mark of a four-emperor of the sea and the world's strongest, washed over the assembled ships. Marine Captain Tauta's jaw tightened. "What arrogance," he growled. "It's the Navy's duty to arrest the Golden Lion. What right have you, a pirate, to interfere?" Though Nethan's actions would have served the Marines' interests, none dared step forward. If word spread that they'd let a pirate handle such a high-value target, their honor would be ruined. Nethan's voice was flat and unwavering. "I'm not asking," he said. "I'm ordering." He turned toward his crew. "Stop them." A flicker of outrage crossed Momotusa's face. She had known Admiral Fujitora. His presence here was no accident, and yet Nethan's tone treated her like a nobody. With a low growl, she swept her blade toward him. Before her strike could land, a deep voice rang out from above. On top of a jagged rock formation, Admiral Fujitora descended into view. He rested one end of his staff sword against the stone. Even through his blindfold, his eyeless gaze seemed to pierce every corner of the battlefield. Calmly, he held out a hand. Enough. At that single word, the wind stilled, the sea stilled, and every force on deck froze in place, caught between loyalty and duty, pirate and marine, under the looming shadow of the world's strongest. Admiral Fujitora moved with uncanny calm. In the next heartbeat, his gravity blade swept through the sky and halted Momugi's attack midair. Shockwaves rippled out as Momugi stumbled back. "Your Excellency," the pirate captain called out with forced respect. "I'll handle him. Nethan, give me your counsel." Momugi inhaled sharply. He knew full well that Fujitora's unwavering defense made any assault on Nethan impossible. Reluctantly, he refocused his full attention on the admiral. By all accounts, the Ghost Hand 1st Division captain's strength surpassed even Shilao of the Rain, an opponent to be taken very seriously. While those two titans clashed, Nethan's gaze drifted toward another figure looming on the horizon, the Golden Lion. The massive pirate boss stood at the helm of his flagship, a man of golden hair streaming in the wind. Stories of his rise to one of the four emperors and his crushing defeat of the Whitebeard had spread like wildfire. Nethan swallowed, recalling the disbelief that had swept the seas when the Golden Lion shattered the white-bearded pirate's name. "I never thought you'd reach such heights," he admitted under his breath. The Golden Lion's amber eyes locked onto Nethan's. With a broad grin, he extended a powerful hand. "With your current strength and my vision, we could rule these seas and the world beyond," he boomed. "Join me, Nethan. Together, Ghost Hand will be unstoppable." Though junior in reputation to the Golden Lion, Nethan had already claimed the title of Emperor himself. The invitation glittered with promise, but the crackle of Fujitora's blade and Momugi's determined stance reminded him that this battle, and the loyalties it demanded, were far from over. Nethan squared his shoulders. His answer would shape the fate of every soul on the ocean. Nethan's eyes glittered with confidence. He knew he wasn't the same fighter he'd once been. No sooner had he finished taunting his opponent than he lunged forward, his blade wreathed in a violent, spiraling force. Pathetic, he snarled as the twisting power erupted toward the golden lion, intent on shattering him in a single blow. Caught off guard, the golden lion nevertheless reacted with lightning speed. He drove his heel into the ground, summoning an aura of regal dominance, and met Nethin's strike with a sweeping counterslash. Their swords collided in a flash of sparks and whirling energy. For a heartbeat, neither combatant gave an inch. Then Nethin's relentless power broke through. The force of his strike sent the gold and lion flipping end over end, hurtling hundreds of meters through the air before he crashed to the earth in a thunderous impact. "One blow to settle this," Nethin declared, lowering his sword as dust billowed around him. Nearby, Momugi, still locked in deadly combat with Fujitora, paused in awe, his breath catching in his throat. He stared at the fallen golden lion, disbelief and respect mingling in his wide eyes. So this was the strength of the self-proclaimed strongest in the world. Even the mighty golden lion, who had been giving everyone else a brutal fight, had been sent flying by a single attack from Nethin. Momotu couldn't help but remember the battle in Dressrosa, when she and the Oracle T-Dolphin had joined forces to defeat Nethin. Back then, Nethin was nowhere near as strong as he is now. He probably wouldn't have stood a chance against her. Yet, after all these years, even though her own power has grown, Nethin's has skyrocketed, leaving her in the dust. How did he manage it? Was she simply not training hard enough? But she'd never relaxed her sword practice for a moment. Beside her, Qingji wore the same stunned expression, secretly sighing at the sheer increase in Nethin's strength. If he faced Nethin alone, he realized he could barely defend himself, let alone win. Since that daring prison break in the promotion city, Nethin's ascent has been nothing short of meteoric, and whispers now call him the strongest man alive. From across the clearing, Long watched Nethin with solemn eyes. He didn't feel fear, but he had to admit that Nethin now outmatched him. In a fight to the death, Long knew he'd be the one to fall. He'd heard tales of Nethin's exploits long ago, and now, at last, the rumors rang undeniably true. Back when the Revolutionary Army first tried to recruit Nethin and Robin, Nethin flatly refused. Everyone assumed he'd be crushed by the Navy soon enough. And sure enough, he was captured and locked away in Advanced City Prison. But nobody expected what happened next. Nethin didn't just escape. He walked out unscathed, seized Shiryu the Rain Guard, Advanced City's elite sentinel, and ignited an uprising no one could stop. Even seasoned fighters like Qingji and Momotu were stunned by his raw power, let alone Luffy, Zoro, and the rest of the Straw Hats. After all, the world had already witnessed the might of the Shichibukai, pirates who could fell monsters with a single blow, the admirals of the Navy, and Shiki the Golden Lion, one of the three great pirate kings alongside Gold D. Roger. They were legends. They were gods. Yet when Nethin finally struck, he landed a single earth-shattering blow that sent Shiki flying like a ragdoll. The Golden Lion, terror of the seas, soared through the air and crashed out of sight. Silence fell over the battlefield. Faces went pale. Everyone's jaws dropped. What just happened? Can anyone explain this? Who is that man? Sauron, standing off to the side, could only gape in disbelief. Nethin, known now as the Ghost Hand, had done the impossible. With one strike, he had reshaped the course of history. Dasiki fell silent for a moment, then looked up at the figure hovering above them. In her eyes lay something like awe and something else, harder to read. She answered Sauron's question in a measured tone. He isn't merely one of the 4 strongest pirates on the Grand Line. He is the strongest pirate alive. 3 Shichibukai fell to him. Big Mom, once counted among the 4 emperors, died by his hand. He even laid waste to the Navy headquarters itself. In this world, no one can stand in his way. Her voice was calm, almost soft, yet each word struck like thunder. Around them, Luffy and the others froze. They'd never heard of the 4 emperors, but they all knew the Wuhai, the world's top swordsman. Dracula Hawkeye Mihawk was a legend among them. And yet Dasiki had just revealed that Nethin had slain 3 Wuhai. Even more astonishing, he'd reduced the Navy's supposedly impregnable headquarters to rubble. Murmurs rippled through the crew. What's his bounty? How could the world government ever hope to capture him? Only Nami remained outwardly unmoved, her expression unreadable as the others grappled with the shocking reality of Nethin's power. She stared at Dasichi in stunned silence, then at last blurted out the question she'd been dying to ask. Dasichi shot a quick look at Nami, then spoke deliberately. 3 billion. Those two words, devoid of any embellishment, eclipsed every wild estimate that had come before. In an instant, the entire crowd went numb, their minds reeling at the enormity of the bounty. 3 billion! Bailey! Chapter 397. How could this be? The golden lion, spinning through the sky, finally righted himself hundreds of meters above the ground. His eyes went wide with disbelief. Even without his legs, left behind in Pushy City, he had never doubted his own strength. He might not rival Whitebeard, but he certainly wasn't helpless. Yet Nethin's strike had struck him with a force that rattled his very core. Shock and rage contorted the lion's leonine features. With a feral roar, he lashed out with his legs, unleashing the full power of his sword technique. His martial aura flared to its zenith. Lion's roar, Chikiriya! He thundered. Countless threads of golden sword chi wove together into a dense net, hurtling toward Nethin like a living torrent. That attack would have maimed any ordinary fighter, but Nethin stood unmoved. His right hand held the blade at a precise angle, his left remaining balled into a fist. Then, with the sound of shattering air, a violent vortex of force exploded between them. Golden sword chi filled the sky, shimmering like leaves in a gale as it tore through rot and decay, only to shatter against Nethin's single, effortless blow. Pathetic. Even as the golden lion's fiercest attack collapsed before him, Nethin felt no exhilaration, only a quiet sigh. Ever since he bested Whitebeard, there'd been no one left to test his power. Though his advancement has slowed at this plateau, he's pressed on, inching forward day after day. And still, he cannot say how strong he truly is. Impossible, the golden lion bellowed, astonished that his all-out assault fell to such a light strike. Not even when I faced Whitebeard did I suffer like this. Nothing is impossible, Nethin replied calmly, eyes sharp. You just don't know who you're up against. With that, he took a single step, and the space between them twisted and shrank in an instant. Nethin dropped down in a single step and landed squarely before the golden lion. Without hesitation, he lashed out, his fist connecting with a thunderous crack. The golden lion braced himself, but the impact was too great. His entire body snapped backward like a blazing comet, trailing a halo of golden fur as he arced through the sky and plummeted toward the far horizon. Nethin didn't pause to watch. Pressing off the air beneath his feet, he created a visible ripple in the sky and shot after his quarry, vanishing into the heavens almost as soon as he'd appeared. Only when he'd gone did Tautu Chingji and the others tear their eyes away. Fear gripped them. If the golden lion was in jeopardy, they knew the pirates would pay the price. Down below, a Navy lieutenant general roused himself. As soon as Nethin and the golden lion disappeared, he swept his long sword in a commanding arc and shouted to the Marines arrayed around him. Their spirits had waned ever since Nethin's earlier assaults, but they rallied at the sight of their officer's fierce determination. Shouts of, "For the crown," rang out as they hefted knives, primed their rifles, and keyed the artillery, ready to overwhelm the pirate fleet at the lieutenant general's command. Luffy and the others finally snapped back to reality and realized they were still smack in the middle of the battlefield, with nothing having changed. Sauron and the other Marines broke out in a cold sweat, their faces pale with panic. Not far away, Long, locked in combat with Kingsley, suddenly paused. A curious light flickered in his eyes as he thrust his right hand forward. A wave of energy rippled outward, and in an instant the dark sky above turned into a roaring windstorm. The gale swept down over Roggy Town and hurtled straight for the Navy's ranks. "Is he really helping the pirates?" Chingji shouted, launching himself forward to intervene. He threw up a barrier to halt Long's strike, but the barrier couldn't contain the hurricane-force gusts that ripped across the battlefield. Sailors and Marines alike were caught off guard, staggered and thrown off balance by the howling wind. Even Luffy and his crew were rocked on their feet. "Now's our chance, San," Jai cried, a fierce grin spreading across his face as he stumbled back a few paces in the blast. He waved to Luffy, Zoro, and the others, urging them forward. In that moment of chaos, the Navy's formation had been scattered, Yet, fortunately for them, not completely broken. The battle was still on. The Navy and the pirates hovered on the brink of all-out war, each side dug in and unwilling to give an inch. Just then, from the Navy's camp, a lone figure burst forward, a vice admiral wearing a fearsome dog skull helmet that completely obscured his face. Without hesitation, he crashed straight into the Golden Lion's pirate contingent and cut down dozens of them by himself. Dark aura coalesced around his fist, and when he struck the earth, it sent a shockwave roaring through Logue Town like a localized quake. Paved stones cracked, flagpoles splintered, and pirates who'd been standing mere yards away were flung airborne. "Look at what you've done to the East Blue," he bellowed, his voice echoing off the buildings as he charged deeper into the camp. Each blow came with crushing force. In half a heartbeat, no one could stand against those punches. With the wind screaming around him, the helmeted admiral carved a massive breach through the pirate ranks. Sanji and the others on the Navy side exchanged looks of relief and excitement. At last, the pirates' front lines gave way. Across the battlefield, Luffy stood frozen, staring in disbelief at the dog-skulled terror. He whipped around toward his captain. "Come on, Luffy. What are you waiting for?" he shouted, panic mixed with urgency in his voice. But Luffy merely grinned, cracked his knuckles, and dashed forward toward the newly opened gap, ready to exploit the admiral's onslaught. Sanji snapped Luffy out of his daze and hauled him back the way they'd come. As they sprinted through the smoke, Luffy glanced over his shoulder at Vice Admiral Smoker and frowned. "That guy looks familiar. Why are you messing with the Navy? Hurry up, Sanji." Sanji didn't reply. He, Zoro, and the others slipped through the narrow gap in the smoke and made their escape. Back on the battlefield, Smoker stood his ground until the haze cleared, then roared, "Dasiki, what are you doing?" Dasiki jolted to attention. Emerging from the dissipating smoke, Smoker had 2 cigars clenched between his teeth, his coat flaring behind him. "How on earth did you let them get away? Those were the Straw Hat Pirates from East Blue." Dasiki stared at him, utterly bewildered. She'd spent plenty of time around Luffy and the others, but she never realized they were real pirates. "The Straw Hat Pirates." Smoker glared at her, exhaling a plume of smoke. He shook his head in exasperation, utterly speechless. Nathan had never minded Dasiki's natural reserve. He'd assumed she'd warm up with time, but instead she seemed to grow more and more oblivious by the day. Was every woman like this? Chapter 398. This is the strongest in the sky realm. Beneath a pure white cloud, a blade of sword energy erupted, piercing the cloud, splitting it in two, and rippling outward across the void as if determined to cleave everything in its path. Floating before this deadly aura was Nethan. Despite the terrifying power hurtling toward him, his face remained utterly serene. With a single wave of his hand, a warping force flared into being, twisting the air into a roiling vortex. The incoming sword chi slammed against this swirling maw, was sucked inside, and shattered with a series of crackling explosions. Don't bother resisting, Golden Lion. Once a relic of the old age, you should have long since withdrawn from this world's stage. Had you retired in peace, I might never have found you. Nethan's voice was calm as he delivered a subtle yet unstoppable strike. The Golden Lion's blade splintered under the impact. Seizing the moment, Nethan pivoted his sword in a swift backhand slash. In an instant, his blade covered dozens of meters of empty air, hurtling straight for the Golden Lion's head. The Golden Lion's face hardened. With a domineering glare, he intercepted Nethan's downward slash, raising his famed deadwood blade to meet the attack. Clang! Steel rang against steel and sparks showered into the air. If the Golden Lion represented the pinnacle of pure, unyielding swordsmanship, Nethan wielded his blade with a raw, brutal force all his own. Not long ago, Nethan had been hopelessly outmatched, but now the gap between them had vanished. Suddenly, a high-pitched buzz cracked overhead, as if an invisible bomb had detonated above the Golden Lion's head. He couldn't withstand the hidden blast. With a deafening crunch, his deadwood blade, jammed by the force of collision, bore into his own leg, grinding bone and steel together. Agony exploded through him as he was flung hundreds of meters backward. He slammed into the ground, his legs shattered, every breath a white-hot agony. Cold sweat drenched his forehead, and his vision swam in a haze of red. Straining to his feet, he fixed Nethan with eyes blazing hate. Hateful, 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 he seethed. 20 years ago, this upstart would have quailed at the mere sight of him, and yet here he stood, unbroken, victorious, while the Golden Lion lay wounded and humiliated, rage welling in his chest at the thought of his ruined pride. This isn't the tremor of fear, it's a roar against aging and obsolescence. I am the Golden Lion, Shiji. His bloodshot eyes burned as he stared at Nethan. Dark rivulets of blood ran down from the corners of his mouth, and in his voice rang the unyielding spirit of one of the era's 3 legends. Time couldn't bury me. The City of Progress couldn't bind me. Don't think you, a brat, can take my head so easily. For a moment, Shiji seemed reborn in his prime. Backlit by the sun, his long golden hair flared out like a lion's mane, and an almost demonic aura shrouded him. Then, with a savage yank, he tore at his right leg. Crack! The ancient blade, once shattered and fused into his bone for 20 years, snapped free in his hand. The hilt dripped crimson, flecks of shattered bone clinging to it. Nethan watched in complete stillness. Calmly, he drew his sword and rested it horizontally across his forearms, his expression utterly serene as he prepared for whatever came next. Unlike Whitebeard, the Golden Lion's mastery of the sword barely wanes with time. Now that he's reclaimed his blade after 20 long years, he has once again risen to the very summit of the world's greatest duelists, and he means to prove it by meeting Nethan in one final, decisive confrontation. Nethan, however, stands unshaken. Even at his peak alongside Whitebeard, how could the Golden Lion in his autumn years possibly surpass his former glory, no matter how fiercely he fights? A tense silence falls over the battlefield. Crimson seeps from a fractured bone in the Golden Lion's right leg, but he does not flinch. Instead, he tightens his grip on the wooden hilt of his famed sword, its face slick with fresh blood, and plants the blade point first in the earth before him, the spine of the weapon level with his brow. In that still moment, every wound from his past surges to the surface. The sting of defeat at Roger's hands, the horror of learning Roger was executed by the Navy, the despair of imprisonment in Impel Down's deepest cells, all coalescing into a single seething fury. The Golden Lion lifts his chin, eyes blazing with a feral light. With a guttural roar, he yanks the sword free and launches a single thunderous strike. Chop! Nethan's eyes narrowed as he faced the Golden Lion's ultimate blade, a weapon whispered about in legends as the culmination of a great swordsman's art. They said one swing of this sword could sever a rain of cannonballs in mid-flight. 1,000 blades might be said to concentrate into its single edge. They even claimed it could cleave through ships or split islands apart. Yet, despite its fearsome reputation, the blade before him gave off only a subtle, golden radiance. Every ounce of its power focused into that one shimmering point. With a decisive clang, the Golden Lion's sword met invisible air. Nethan, who had foreseen this moment well in advance, calmly slid Murasame back into its scabbard. "Very well," he murmured, voice steady. "If that is your move, I will meet it head-on." He drew in a long, measured breath and curled the fingers of his right hand into a tight fist. It had been years since he unleashed his full strength, but now every strand of his battle-honed energy began to coil and twist around his knuckles. The air around him warped, light bending into darkness as raw force surged outward. Then, with a single explosive motion, Nethan hurled his fist toward the Golden Lion's blade, ready to test the full measure of his own power. Darkness fell with Nethan's fist. It wasn't simply that the punch struck hard, it seemed to swallow every trace of sound and light in a 100-meter radius, leaving the battlefield drenched in absolute silence and pitch-black void. Within that abyss, warping forces writhed in a frenzied dance, tearing apart everything they touched. Then came a single, muted boom, no thunderous roar, but the hollow crack of firecrackers exploding under a bowl. In an instant, the black shroud shattered. A distorted flash of light shot upward, carving a pale cloud above the looming form of the Golden Lion before vanishing into the boundless sky. The Golden Lion hovered there, sword in hand. Slowly he let the blade slip downward, its tip tracing a faint arc as if he'd lost the will to keep holding it. His eyes, still locked on Nethan, held a grudging respect. After a long pause, he spoke softly. "You win." His voice trailed off. Strength drained from him, and the famed sword clattered to the deck. Like a marionette whose strings had been cut, the Golden Lion collapsed, tumbling toward the dark waves below. Nathan watched in silence as the great warrior vanished beneath the sea. A curious wave of emotion swelled in his chest, something he couldn't name, yet would never forget. Nathan felt a surge of power he could only imagine Whitebeard had known, though never as intensely as he did in this moment. His heart was oddly calm, almost numb. The Golden Lion, desperate to defend what remained of his pride, raised his sword for one final, decisive strike. But to Nathan, it no longer felt like their earlier battles. He sensed a profound shift in his own mindset. Before today, Nathan had always stood at the foot of the steps, looking up, scrambling, and challenging those above him. Now he occupied the summit, peering down at everyone, Golden Lion included, with a new perspective. From this vantage point, every face, every blade, every breath of his adversary seemed smaller, diminished. This was strength, the exhilarating certainty of standing at the very top of the world. Chapter 399, The Third Incarnation. 2 weeks later, deep within the heart of Cake Island's central experimental base, Nathan stood in the shadowed chamber known only to him, Trafalgar Law, Caesar Clown, and Nico Robin. No one, even the captain of his crew, could enter this top-secret facility without Nathan's explicit permission. Today marked the culmination of their most ambitious project yet, the Third Combat Unit. In the vast, sterile hall, Nathan's gaze settled on a lone figure. A golden lion-headed humanoid knelt before him, mane glinting under the harsh overhead lights. In his right paw, he gripped Sakura Ten, in his left, Deadwood. Both blades were legendary, and their new owner embodied their power. It had taken half a month of meticulous work to bring this beast back from the brink of death. After their fierce duel, Nathan had spared the Golden Lion, carrying him to Cake Island in critical condition. There, Law had performed intricate reconstructive surgery to restore shattered bones and graft synthetic joints. Caesar's biomechanical enhancements accelerated cellular regeneration, while Gertz's rare healing fruit stabilized the lion's internal systems. Finally, they implanted the Homa's devil fruit ability, fusing its power directly into his nervous system. Now, revitalized and armed, the Third Combat Unit rose to his feet. Nathan surveyed his new ally with a measured nod. The process was complete, and the age of the Third Incarnation had begun. Shiki the Golden Lion, now he's the second most powerful puppet under Nathan's command, the Asura Path Automaton. At this moment, Nathan directly wields 3 titanic avatars, the Hurricane Incarnation, Katakuri of the Evil Ghost Path, and Shiki the Golden Lion from the Asura Path. First in strength is the Hurricane Incarnation. Untethered to any physical body and fueled by near-endless energy, it can go toe-to-toe with an admiral in raw power. Given 10 days and nights, it would inevitably emerge victorious simply by outlasting its opponent. Second comes the Golden Lion of the Asura Path. Nathan's soul avatar cannot perfectly replicate its master's ultimate swordsmanship, but it retains enough memory of those techniques to strike devastating blows. Bolstered by the Golden Lion's own feral strength, its rapid regeneration, boosted by Trafalgar and Caesar's transformations, and the enhancements of the fluttering fruit, this puppet even outclasses Katakuri in sheer combat prowess. That leaves Katakuri, of the Evil Ghost Path, in third place. A fearsome warrior in his own right, but still trailing behind Nathan's 2 mightiest constructs. Nathan's 3 combat avatars weren't individuals at all, but extensions of his own will, like a gun or sword he wielded in battle. Together, their combined strength elevated Nathan to the level of a 4-emperor pirate, all on his own. Were anyone to learn of his secret puppet incarnations, the world government would move heaven and earth to wipe him out. Thankfully, scarcely anyone knew the truth, not even captains like fishermen. Standing at Nathan's side, Trafalgaro watched the Golden Lion puppet snap its eyes open and salute. "Boss." The odd mix of reverence and awe in its mechanical voice made Trafalgaro's own eyes glint. "With power like this," he said, "we could take on Marine headquarters and hold our own." Nathan fell silent, running through the roster in his mind. Garp, Sengoku, the 3 admirals, the 2 vice-admirals, even former fleet commander Black Arm Zephyr. Their combined might rivaled his puppets almost exactly. After a moment, he shook his head. "It's close," he admitted, "but if you factor in the entire world government, it still isn't enough." Nathan lowered his head, deep in thought. The world government's true strength was always hidden beneath the surface, only the tiniest fraction ever revealed. Even the ghost hand pirates had barely scratched the surface when it came to gathering intel on the regime. All they'd confirmed was that Army Commander-in-Chief Kong Gu Gang possessed combat power rivaling that of an admiral. On top of that, the newly appointed CP0 Chief and General High Prison, who'd served alongside the legendary Steel Gukong, were both said to be terrifyingly strong. With a steady breath, Nethan summoned his puppet incarnation of the Shura Dao. In the cavernous hall of the underground base, he faced off against his own creation, trading a handful of swift, controlled strikes. After only a few moves, Nethan called the exercise to an end. Just as he'd predicted, the puppet version edged out even Katakuri's incarnation in raw power, but it still lagged behind a peak state admiral. After all, this was only a puppet, not the Golden Lion at full strength. Even so, it could hold an admiral at bay long enough to be useful. Close enough, Nethan murmured, sheathing his blade. Now, to put my plan into motion. Nethan stared at the puppet replica before him and drew in a steadying breath. Everything was unfolding exactly as he'd foreseen. Once Blackbeard subdued Ace and handed over the Fire Fist to the Navy, a summit war would be unavoidable. In the wake of Ace's capture, the world government and Navy would impose martial law across their entire forces, shifting into a purely defensive stance, forced to react rather than strike. But that enforced lull, the tense interval between Ace's arrest and the outbreak of the summit conflict, was precisely the window Nethan had been waiting for. In those precious days, he would unleash his plan to wipe out the beast pirates in one decisive blow. 4 emperors already held sway in the New World. It was time to trim their number back down by 1 more. Leaving the core base behind, Nethan sailed back to Sky Island Bika. There, Nico Robin sat surrounded by stacks of intercepted reports and classified briefings, her brow furrowed as she sorted through the latest intelligence. As he stepped into the war room, she slid him a freshly printed newspaper. "They've done it," Robin announced. "The Straw Hat crew has taken down another Shichibukai." Nethan took the paper, scanning the bold headline, "Straw Hats overthrow rival Shichibukai." He read on. The report confirmed that, after defeating Mr. 1, Crocodile was no more, the Straw Hats had been rerouted by a storm into uncharted waters. There, they encountered yet another Shichibukai, whose power rivaled the Desert Lord's. In a fierce showdown, Luffy and his crew laid waste to him as thoroughly as they had Crocodile. Nethan folded the paper, a slow smile curving his lips. Each blow the Straw Hats struck against the world government's champions only hastened the coming conflict. And when that war finally erupted, the beast pirates would be waiting, and so would he. After the latest battle, Luffy's bounty shot up to 100 million Baileys, Zoro's rose to 30 million, and Sanji's to 28 million. After all, Luffy isn't just any pirate. He's Admiral Garp's grandson and the son of the Revolutionary Army's dragon. Robin glanced the paper beside Nethan and coached him through the tangled details one more time. The straw hat on Luffy's head originally belonged to Roger, then passed through red-haired Shanks before landing with him. All those connections, Garp, Dragon, Roger, Shanks, wove together into something remarkable. Nethan picked up an apple, took a bite, and set the newspaper down. Ever since Blackbeard's defection, he'd been busy recruiting every shady pirate he could find, but he still lacked a clear strategy. By contrast, the moment Luffy defeated a Shichibukai and left a vacancy among the 7 warlords, he immediately stepped in, using the title to accelerate his own rise. Will Blackbeard do the same? Robin picked up the newspaper from the coffee table and scanned the front page. "They've been watching him closely," Nethan remarked, folding his arms, "but he still hasn't made a move." Robin glanced over without looking up. "Understood. We'll keep eyes on him." Today, Robin had opted for a sleek, form-fitting black skirt that cut just above the knee. Seated across from him, Nethan couldn't help but notice how the fabric hugged her hips and traced the line of her thighs. Through the slight slit at the side, he caught a glimpse of delicate lace beneath, an accidental, tantalizing reveal. Nethan's gaze lingered. Her legs looked impossibly smooth, like polished marble warmed by sunlight. He hesitated a moment, then, unable to resist, reached out and pinched her thigh. Robin stiffened, dropping the newspaper in surprise. but even as her eyes flashed in mild annoyance, a faint smile tugged at her lips. "Nethin," she said softly. "Focus." He leaned back, clearing his throat. "Right, of course." Silently, they returned to their task, watching, waiting, ready for the slightest sign of movement.